Hi everyone. Before we get into this audiobook, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit the subscribe button and drop a like. It helps me out a lot as well as contributes a lot to the channel. Now let's get into the story. I hope you enjoy. The morning air clung to the small cluster of timber-framed cottages in the heart of the pack's territory, wrapping them in a cold shroud as the sun tried to burn its way through a haze of clouds. Sylvia emerged from her cramped bunk in the servants' quarters before dawn, though the word quarters felt generous for the rickety structure where the Omega wolves slept. She had learned to rise early, hoping to secure a few minutes of quiet before her daily tasks began. Unfortunately, a heavy tension always found its way into her chest the moment she opened her eyes. The thought of stepping into the main house, where higher-ranked pack members dwelled in comfort, made her stomach twist. She told herself that if she moved fast enough, if she kept her head down and her mouth shut, perhaps she could slip by unnoticed this morning. She tugged on a threadbare dress, one of the hand-me-downs donated by wealthier packmates who had long grown tired of the garment. Its faded material, once a rich burgundy, now looked more like a washed-out brown. After tying her hair back from her face, Sylvia stepped outside, boots crunching on the pebbled ground. A cold breeze made her shiver. Wolves weren't supposed to feel the cold so keenly, but she wasn't like the others. She had less body mass, not enough to keep her warm. That fact was confirmed by the reflection she caught in a small window pane, though she tried not to linger on her slight silhouette. She saw in her own eyes a mixture of resignation and courage, a readiness to endure whatever the day threw at her. Serving as the pack's weakest Omega came with endless tasks. She was well used to the routine: gather fresh produce from the small greenhouse, help in the kitchens, clean the floors, and remain on call for any menial chore that needed doing. She never complained, for doing so would only provoke more sneers from those who felt her rank meant she deserved no better. In this territory, status was everything. The Alpha's family reigned, followed by the Betas who served directly beneath them, and so on, down to the low-ranking wolves who made up the labor force. At the very bottom stood Omega wolves, often undervalued and disregarded. They were commonly assigned to tasks no one else wanted. Some tried to argue that Omegas served an important role in keeping the peace, that they offered stability and unity for the rest of the pack. Yet this pack seemed to have no such appreciation. Sylvia, quiet and unassuming, found herself subject to constant ridicule and exploitation, particularly after the war had begun. The war had taken many of the strongest wolves away, including Rowan, the Alpha's eldest son. In the years since his departure, the Alpha's seat was held by the pack's Council of Elders in a caretaker capacity. It was rumored that once Rowan returned, he would assume leadership in his rightful place. Yet the pack had changed. Morale had soured, resentments had blossomed, and the absence of a commanding Alpha presence opened the door for cruelty to fester. Every time Sylvia overheard a rumor about Rowan, she felt an unexpected tug in her chest, an unnameable feeling stirring inside her. She remembered seeing him in passing years ago, just after she had first arrived in the territory. He'd been tall and broad-shouldered, with a confident gleam in his eyes. Back then, she harbored a naive hope that perhaps the future Alpha wouldn't be like the others, that he might actually care about an Omega's well-being. But he had left for war soon after, and any chance for him to notice her plight vanished with the crack of dawn. She was so used to blending into the background that she even forgot, at times, what it felt like to be addressed by name. Her shadowy existence offered safety in its own twisted way. At least if the pack's stronger wolves didn't see her, they wouldn't single her out for their sadistic amusements, which included demands to run errands at impossible speeds or endure sneering remarks about her lack of care. Fighting ability. Over time, Sylvia learned that compliance and invisibility were better than confrontation. She had enough bruises to justify this strategy. A particularly deep one stained her left shoulder even now, a dull ache flaring each time she reached for a high shelf or lugged a heavy crate. Only last week, a group of betas had taken offense at the slightest mistake. Some produce had fallen from her arms, and they'd punished her with a rough shove that sent her crashing into a wooden bench. She'd apologized profusely and fled, swallowing her pride and telling herself that a few bruises would heal in time. A hush lay over the main house as Sylvia slipped inside, making her way toward the sprawling kitchen. Despite the poor treatment she often received, she found a measure of comfort in the tasks that used her hands. The scents of flour, yeast, and leftover stews greeted her as she stepped onto the worn flagstone floors. A bustling day would soon begin, but at this very early hour, only a couple of older kitchen helpers were awake, kneading dough for the morning's bread. Heads turned at her entrance, but no words of greeting followed. She offered a slight nod, then set about checking the stock of vegetables in the pantry, quietly making mental notes of what needed replenishing. On this particular day, she had been asked to gather mushrooms from the patch near the forest edge. It was a task she didn't mind, for stepping outside gave her the chance to roam freely, even if only for a short while. She enjoyed the forest's musky scent, the sway of the tall pines, and the gentle sigh of the wind that seemed to tell stories of distant mountains. If anyone asked, she would claim she needed to ensure the mushrooms were the freshest variety, but really she used it as an excuse to be momentarily alone. So, with a half-filled wicker basket in hand, Sylvia made her way out back. The garden paths wound past vegetable plots and a small orchard until she reached the edge of the trees. The air felt different here, sharp with pine resin and the faint crackle of twigs underfoot. Her ears picked up a whisper of movement behind her, barely audible. She paused. A fleeting sense of caution trickled through her. Turning around, she spotted Jackson, one of the betas who prided himself on mocking the omegas whenever possible. He strutted forward with an air of arrogance, arms crossed over a muscular chest. His bright eyes flicked dismissively over the small basket in Sylvia's hand. The corner of his mouth twitched upward as he recognized who stood before him. "Off to gather fungus, are we?" he said in a bored tone. Sylvia swallowed hard and nodded without meeting his gaze. She knew from experience that replying too earnestly might provoke him. Jackson enjoyed toying with those he perceived as weaker. He drew closer, leaning in so that she could smell the faint trace of last night's ale on his breath. "You know, the elders are saying the new alpha will arrive any day now," Jackson continued, in a tone suggesting he relished the idea of her panic. "I wonder if he'll even notice you exist. Or maybe he'll send you away. It's possible that he'll realize we have no use for such a feeble omega." Her heart hammered in her chest, but she refused to let him see it. This was the routine. Any mention of Rowan carried a weight of excitement for the rest of the pack, for his return meant the war had concluded in their favor, or at least enough for him to come home. For Sylvia, the prospect of his arrival triggered both curiosity and dread. Would he change anything? Would he see the bruises, the fear etched into the lower ranks? Or would he turn a blind eye, as so many alphas had done before him? She didn't have answers, and Jackson's sneer dug at her insecurities. "I'll be back soon," Sylvia replied, forcing her voice to stay even as she stepped around him, aiming for the forest path. She could feel him watching her, the weight of his disdain pressing against her back. By the time she slipped into the pine glade, the tension in her chest was almost suffocating. She exhaled, leaning momentarily against the rough bark of a tree to calm her nerves. She reminded herself that it was still early in the day, and if she completed her tasks efficiently, she could avoid too much more trouble. The mushrooms grew in clusters beneath fallen logs and among the mossy roots. As she carefully selected the best specimens for the kitchen, her mind drifted to the whispers she'd heard around the pack about Rowan. They said he was a fierce warrior, capable of silencing an entire battlefield with the force of his shift. They said he had subdued rogue packs and even negotiated alliances with neighboring territories. In stark contrast, Sylvia pictured herself as a small, solitary figure gathering mushrooms. The question that kept nagging at her was whether Rowan's rumored ferocity extended toward his own people. Would he punish them for harming those in lower ranks? Or would he allow such cruelty to continue? She hoped he would be different, that he wouldn't turn away from the silent suffering that had become part of daily life here. But in the back of her mind, an old voice whispered cynicism. After all, he had been gone for so long. Would he even recall that the Omegas needed consideration? She carefully filled her basket, her fingertips stained with the damp earth. When she finally stood, a slight smile ghosted her lips. At least in the hush of the forest, she felt safe. A gentle breeze played across her cheeks, as though it wanted to offer some small comfort. She turned to head back, preparing herself for the barrage of chores that awaited. Approaching the main house once again, Sylvia braced for another encounter with the betas, or possibly even a scolding from the head cook about tardiness. Instead, she discovered a heightened activity in the courtyard, where older members of the pack scrambled to sweep stones, polish windows, and arrange small decorations. The entire place buzzed with anticipation. She quickly hurried into the kitchen, setting the basket of mushrooms on a worn oak table. Several pairs of eyes turned toward her with irritation. The cook, a stern woman with hawk-like features, waved a wooden spoon in the air. "Finally," she snapped. "We need these cleaned and sliced. And mind yourself, we have important guests soon. Everything must be perfect." Sylvia nodded obediently, rolled up her sleeves, and started scrubbing the mushrooms at the sink. The roar of conversation floated through the open window. She picked up bits and pieces. Something about Rowan, how he might arrive with his personal guard, how the elders were scrambling to prepare a worthy welcome. There was no direct mention of the war's outcome, but the underlying assumption was that Rowan wouldn't be returning unless the conflict had reached some kind of conclusion. That alone was enough to set the entire pack on edge, caught between excitement and trepidation. The last time a returning alpha arrived, the pack held a night-long celebration. But that alpha had been older, more diplomatic. Rowan was rumored to be a different breed altogether. By mid-morning, the sense of expectancy in the air had risen to a fever pitch. Sylvia found herself rushing around with various trays, placing them on tables in the largest hall. She had to dodge older betas and a few of the younger wolves who were practicing their best-mannered smiles. One clumsy step cost her a near collision with a tall male werewolf who barked at her to be more careful, calling her Omega scum. She bowed her head and apologized. Despite her efforts to remain invisible, those harsh labels had a way of finding her ears. That was the reality of her place here. As she moved about, the lingering question of Rowan's personality gnawed at her. Years back, when she was just starting to learn the ways of the pack, she'd glimpsed him in the training yard. He had been stern-faced, locked in a spar with a beta who towered over almost everyone. Rowan had moved with fluid power, quick reflexes, and an unyielding focus that left onlookers breathless. Sylvia had crouched behind a stack of crates, peering through a crack, her heart racing at the display. She'd observed the moment he pinned his opponent, holding the training blade to the beta's throat. For a heartbeat, a dark glint had flickered in Rowan's eyes, something primal and intense, before he let his opponent go. Then he had laughed, extending a hand to help the beta up. That was the only time Sylvia had witnessed Rowan in such proximity. He never noticed her. She had been just another Omega, overshadowed by the swirl of excitement that always followed him. After all, he was the Alpha's son, destined for greatness, while she served in silence. Now, the hush from outside announced that something monumental was happening. The kitchen staff stood straighter, their faces turned toward the windows. Even the betas who'd been lazing around picked themselves up, smoothing their hair and straightening their clothing. Sylvia felt her pulse jump, a strange sensation swirling through her abdomen. She slipped near the open doorway, peering out into the courtyard. Dust rose from the cobblestones as a group of wolves on horseback arrived. At the center of that column was a man with dark hair and a regal bearing. Rowan. An involuntary shudder ran through Sylvia's body. She ducked her head, arms wrapped around herself, the memory of that intense glint in his eyes returning in full force. Silence pressed heavily on the courtyard for a moment. Then the elders approached him, bowing their heads in respect. Rowan dismounted and surveyed the area with a calm but commanding expression. His gaze flickered over the group of betas, the cowering Omegas who dared to watch, and finally to the servants lined up by the door, though his eyes never lingered on Sylvia specifically. She released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Perhaps it was a silly thought, but she was both relieved and disappointed that he hadn't seen her. She wanted to escape attention, to remain anonymous, yet a small voice in her heart wondered what it might feel like to be recognized by an alpha who, rumor said, carried the weight of greatness. One of the elders, a gray-haired man whose eyes twinkled with forced humility, welcomed Rowan warmly. "We are honored to have you back," he said, gesturing for Rowan to come inside. Voices rose in a flurry of polite conversation, an undercurrent of anxiety swirling just beneath it. All the talk about fresh illusions of unity and celebration did little to hide the cracks in the pack's morale. Sylvia sensed tension in the posture of the betas, in the cautious looks they exchanged. She wondered if Rowan could sense it too. She caught only fragments of what happened next. The next few hours blurred as she dashed back and forth delivering drinks and refilling platters. She heard Rowan's deep, resonant voice responding to the elders' questions, offering measured, strategic replies. He didn't brag of his victories, nor did he delve into the details of war. Instead, he methodically addressed the pack's most immediate concerns: territory security, order patrol rosters, and the negotiation of supply routes. The more he spoke, the more the tension across the courtyard seemed to dissipate, replaced by a cautious sense of hope. Perhaps the rumored ferocity wasn't a sign of tyranny, but rather the grit and discipline that might unify a fractured territory. Some of the Omegas, including Sylvia, were relegated to a cramped corner of the main hall, waiting on standby to address the slightest need. A single beckoning gesture from a beta or an elder would send an Omega scurrying to fulfill the request. In that corner, Sylvia felt small and inconsequential, exactly as she had been taught to feel. But her ears were keen. She found herself listening in on the swirl of conversation, trying to glean every detail she could about Rowan. Every snippet of rumor, every mention of his future plans, felt like threads in a tapestry she was beginning to piece together. She feared this new alpha might bring about an even harsher era for the Omegas. But she also feared hoping for anything better. She was so absorbed in thought that she nearly jumped when Elena, another Omega, nudged her. "Go replenish the bread baskets at the high table," Elena whispered urgently. Sylvia saw that the line of bread baskets had indeed run low. Without hesitation, she took a tray of freshly sliced loaves and carefully navigated the hall, weaving around elders who chatted in hushed voices. She approached the high table at the center of the room, where Rowan and several high-ranking officials sat. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She kept her gaze lowered, focusing on the tablecloth, on the silverware, anything to avoid looking directly at him. She placed the basket by an elder with trembling hands, then moved to set another near Rowan's seat. The scent of pine and leather wafted off him, so striking that Sylvia felt her heart pound harder. Her wolf sense picked up something else, something warm and alluring layered beneath the more obvious scents, and it made her throat constrict. She wondered how a person could carry such an intoxicating smell without even trying. She averted her eyes, determined not to draw attention to herself. Yet when she straightened, she felt a tingle along her skin, as though someone's gaze had locked onto her. She dared not look up, but she knew in the marrow of her bones that Rowan's eyes were on her. Time seemed to slow, as her heart hammered so loudly she feared everyone else could hear it. A brief pause stretched out. Then Rowan spoke in a low, measured tone that still carried the edge of an order. "Thank you," he said. The words were simple, but they vibrated with authority. Sylvia forced herself to nod. She then pivoted to leave, her entire being a swirl of nerves. She bit her lip, nearly stumbling over her own feet. The head elder coughed politely, redirecting Rowan's attention to some pending question about pack finances. Freed from Rowan's gaze, Sylvia scurried back toward the Omega station, her cheeks burning. It was as though she had stepped too close to a bonfire and been scorched by the heat. She took a shaky breath, not even sure why her body was reacting so intensely. Certainly, it was normal to feel intimidated around the new alpha, but something about his presence was different, more potent than she had ever anticipated. For the remainder of the day, she managed to keep her distance, focusing on chores behind the scenes. She stoked the kitchen fires, swept floors, and updated inventories. All the while, she couldn't shake the remnants of that suffocating heat she had sensed when she was near Rowan. It lingered on her skin like the memory of a brand. Eventually, the day wore on toward dusk, and the official welcome feast began. Music drifted through the courtyard, lively and energetic, punctuated by occasional bursts of laughter. Sylvia slipped around the edges, clearing used dishes and refilling drinks. She watched from the shadows as dancers twirled, as the betas jostled each other in a show of bravado, and as Rowan politely conversed with each elder who approached. A regal figure, even in his relaxed moments, he gestured with casual confidence. Once or twice, she caught him scanning the crowd with a subtle wariness, as though searching for something. She quickly lowered her head, not wanting to be caught staring. The feast ran late into the night. As the bonfire sent sparks dancing into the sky, and the chatter grew louder under the glow of lanterns, Sylvia felt the weight of exhaustion tug at her eyelids. Omegas didn't get to rest until everyone else decided the celebration was over, so she had no choice but to keep circulating. At one point, she found herself standing outside, carting empty mugs to the back kitchen door. She paused for a moment, drawing in a lungful of night air. The distant tree line swayed in a gentle breeze, and the moon hung low. She allowed herself a tiny moment of calm, letting her eyes close briefly. A footfall behind her broke her reverie. She turned to see a faint silhouette just at the edge of the lamplight. Instantly, alarm flared within her, because the figure was large, yet absolutely silent in approach. A single step forward brought him into the gentle glow of a torch fixed to the wall. Rowan. He held no drink in his hands, no plate of food. It seemed as though he had intentionally sought a quiet corner rather than remain in the center of the crowd. Sylvia's entire body stiffened. He studied her with quiet curiosity, his expression unreadable. In the hush of night, he exuded a raw, imposing presence that made her breath hitch. He wore a finely tailored dark coat, the fabric accentuating his broad shoulders, but beneath that refined attire lurked the aura of a warrior. He had a bearing that announced authority, strength, and something intangible that lingered in the space between them. She realized she was staring at him, so she swiftly lowered her gaze. Her mind raced, searching for the respectful protocol for an Omega in this situation. Usually, she would bow or quietly slip away, but something in Rowan's eyes held her rooted. He took another step closer. Even though he was not standing so near as to crowd her, she could feel the warmth that radiated from his body. The potency of his scent, a blend of pine, leather, and that underlying note of intrigue, intensified. It sent a ripple of confusion through her. Her wolf sense bristled, hyperware. She told herself to keep calm, to remain polite, yet a rapid hammering in her chest betrayed her nerves. Finally, he spoke in a voice still pitched low, respectful of the midnight silence. "You were the one who brought the bread baskets earlier," he said, not quite a question, more a soft observation. She nodded. "Yes, Alpha," she managed to reply, her voice trembling faintly. I was told to serve at the high table." Rowan's intense gaze traveled across her features, and for a moment, she feared he might reprimand her for speaking too quietly or for not bowing enough. Instead, he paused, as though listening to some silent echo. "You seem different," he said. "I noticed you while you were working." That admission startled her. Omegas, especially ones as quiet as Sylvia, almost never warranted second glances from those of higher rank. "I'm just another Omega, Alpha," she ventured cautiously, uncertain how else to respond. His gaze flickered, revealing a brief glimpse of something akin to perplexity. He looked at her for a beat longer than was comfortable, making her heart slam against her ribcage. Then, abruptly, he spoke as though concluding an internal debate. "Forgive me if this is too sudden," he said, "but have we met before I left for war?" Her mouth went dry. On one hand, she felt a flicker of hope that perhaps he remembered something, anything, about the times she had been around the training yard or in the background of certain gatherings. On the other, fear burned through her. If Rowan realized she had been subject to relentless bullying, would that bring more problems? "Not really," she said, forcing her voice not to waver. I was fairly new, and I mostly kept to the tasks assigned to me. I doubt you would have noticed me." He gave a thoughtful nod, his expression unreadable. The night air crackled with tension. Sylvia found herself wanting to flee, but her feet wouldn't move. Part of her brain screamed to be cautious, for her secret lurked just beneath the surface. She couldn't allow herself to be dragged into the orbit of the new Alpha. Not only did it threaten her fragile safety, but there was also that other piece of her life, the one she kept locked away. If that secret were discovered, the consequences would be disastrous for her, and possibly for the pack. Just then, a raucous burst of laughter from the courtyard broke the moment, reminding them both of the ongoing celebration. Rowan's eyes flickered in that direction. He seemed briefly torn between returning to the feast and lingering in the silence with her. In the end, he inclined his head politely. "Thank you for your service," he said simply. There was a note in his voice Sylvia couldn't interpret. Then, he turned and walked away, melting back into the swirl of music and chatter as though he'd never been there at all. Sylvia stood there, the empties still balanced on her tray, her heart pounding. She had expected him to be aloof, indifferent, maybe even cruel. Instead, he seemed curious, She scolded herself for reading too much into it. He was just being polite, that was all. A faint flicker of longing sparked within her, an absurd hope that maybe Rowan's reign would be different. But she brushed that away quickly. She had learned that high hopes often led to heartbreak. Duty summoned her inside, so she collected herself and returned to the bustle, determined to forget that exchange. By the time the celebration ended, it was well past midnight. Most of the pack had retired to their rooms or stumbled back to their homes, lulled by the heavy dregs of feasting and drink. The courtyard was littered with trampled flowers and discarded cups. Omegas trudged about cleaning, while a few betas barked final orders before heading off to sleep. Sylvia's back ached, and her arms were sore from carrying heavy trays. However, she wouldn't be released until the place was tidied. That was part of her position. Last to rest, first to rise. A group of rowdy young wolves cornered her near the stacked barrels, demanding she fetch them more ale. She explained that the casks had been emptied earlier, which they took as an affront. "Useless Omega!" one snarled, a sneer twisting his lips. Another shoved her, forcing her to drop the small cloth she had been using. "Always worthless," the first one growled. Sylvia bowed her head, apologized, and tried to slip away. But they blocked her path, herding her toward a dim corner where the torchlight barely reached. Her pulse thudded in dread. She knew how this could end. They might decide to amuse themselves by pushing her around. Or worse. Just as one of them reached out to grab her hair, a sharp voice rang through the courtyard. "Stand down," it said. The cluster of betas stiffened immediately, recognizing the commanding tone. Sylvia turned her head to see Rowan approaching, his posture calm but lethal. His eyes glinted in the torchlight, and tension radiated off him like a storm about to break. The betas stumbled over themselves, trying to stammer excuses. "We were just... she..." They couldn't form a coherent explanation under the alpha's scrutiny. Rowan's expression hardened. "Leave," he ordered. "Now?" His voice lacked any warmth, each syllable a warning. One by one, the young wolves slunk away, heads hung low, in shame, and perhaps fear. Sylvia felt faint relief, but also a spike of panic. The last thing she wanted was to draw attention from Rowan, yet here he was again, intervening on her behalf. She stood uncertainly, not quite sure what to say or do. Rowan regarded her silently for a second. "Are you all right?" he finally asked, the traces of anger still lingering in his eyes, presumably directed at the betas. She nodded, hugging her arms. "Yes, Alpha, I'm fine," she lied. Her shoulder still throbbed from the push, but it was nothing new. "Thank you," she added, glancing at his boots rather than his face. His voice softened. "I'm sorry that happened." Hearing an alpha apologize to her was so far beyond her expectations that she didn't know how to react. She nodded in acknowledgement, but her mind reeled. She wondered if he saw the bruises peeking from the edge of her sleeve, or if he simply sensed her fear. Before she could gather her thoughts, he stepped back, letting her breathe again. "Next time," Rowan said gently, "if anyone troubles you, come find me or another elder." Then, as though catching himself revealing too much concern, he quickly turned and walked away, leaving her shaken and uncertain. She wanted to sag onto the stone steps, to process what had just transpired. The new alpha had intervened for her sake. No one had ever stepped in to help her before. She had always been alone, reliant on her own caution to survive. Now, she found herself unsettled by the gratitude that rippled through her. It tangled with her caution and something else. Something deeper. She swallowed hard and pulled herself together, focusing on finishing the cleanup before at last trudging back to the servants' quarters. Only once she collapsed onto her narrow cot did the tears slip silently down her cheeks. The fact that Rowan had shown her kindness only sharpened her hidden fear, because if he ever discovered the truth about her, about the secret she kept locked in her soul, she doubted even his unexpected decency would protect her. Morning came too soon, dragging Sylvia from a fitful sleep into the dawn's cold light. Her entire body felt heavy, but she knew her tasks would not wait. It was well known that Rowan planned to hold a series of private meetings with elders and high-ranked wolves over the coming days, discussing how to reorganize the pack now that the conflict seemed to be winding down. The fortress-like main house would become a hive of strategy, with every corridor bustling. It meant endless chores for the Omegas, but also, ironically, more opportunities for her to observe the new Alpha from afar. She tried to tell herself she shouldn't care, and yet she found her thoughts drifting back to that moment in the courtyard, the look in Rowan's eyes when he told those betas to stand down. She half expected him to forget about the incident, to return to the day-to-day duties of commanding a pack. Indeed, for most of that morning, that seemed to be the case. Rowan was nowhere to be seen. She assumed he was in one of the council chambers, hashing out logistical details with the elders. She spent the hours running errands, wiping down dusty shelves, and lugging crates of supplies. Once, she had to pass by the council chamber to deliver freshly brewed tea. Her chest tightened as she neared the heavy wooden door. Voices rumbled behind it, Rowan's among them, though she couldn't make out the words. For a moment, she simply paused, the tray balanced in her hands, picturing his face. "Stop it," she chided herself. "He's the Alpha. He doesn't have time to think about you." She pushed open the door with careful steps, entering quietly. The high-ranking wolves gave her barely a glance as she placed the tea on the long table. She heard them discussing border security and the need to rotate patrols. Rowan leaned over the table with a map laid out before him, his brows furrowed in concentration. She seized the chance to sneak a look at him. The flickering lamplight cast shadows across the strong angles of his face, accentuating the determined set of his jaw. Even in this subdued setting, power radiated from him. Sylvia noticed the faint lines of exhaustion under his eyes, the product of travel and war. Still, he exuded an imposing presence, an aura that demanded deference. She backed out of the room, no one acknowledging her departure except for a fleeting sideways glance from Rowan. She couldn't decipher his expression, and she hurried away, her nerves afire. Throughout that day, her mind swarmed with conflicting emotions. She dreaded drawing notice, yet she couldn't chase away the memory of Rowan stepping in to help her. She told herself that such an event was unlikely to occur again. She was an Omega, among the lowest rungs of the pack. He was the Alpha, newly returned and preoccupied with a mountain of responsibilities. Their paths should barely intersect. And that was exactly how she needed it to be, for the sake of her own safety. Late afternoon found her in the courtyard, kneeling by a large wash basin and scrubbing linens with stiff bristled brushes. The repeated motion helped steady her scattered thoughts. After rinsing each piece, she wrung out the excess water and draped it over a nearby line. It was tedious, but straightforward work, the sort that gave her room to breathe. She was so absorbed in the monotony that she almost missed the hush that fell over the courtyard. A presence loomed behind her. She glanced over her shoulder and found Rowan standing there, hands behind his back, his gaze traveling over her chores. Her pulse stuttered. "Alpha," she said quietly, rising to her feet. She forced her eyes to remain downcast. Should I? Do you need anything? In that moment, she was painfully aware of her soaked skirt and the damp locks of hair clinging to her face. Rowan hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. I came to find you, he said, voice low enough that no one else could overhear. I wanted to check on you after last night's incident. He glanced around, ensuring they were relatively alone. Thankfully, most of the other Omegas were busy elsewhere, and the Betas seemed disinclined to pay attention to anything involving laundry. Did they bother you again? She shook her head, trying to quell the trembling in her hands. No, Alpha. They probably learned their lesson. She managed a small, polite smile, though her nerves buzzed. He studied her, his expression somewhat softer than before. The corners of his eyes crinkled slightly, an expression that almost resembled concern. You shouldn't have to endure that treatment, not in your own pack. Her throat tightened. Your own pack. The words carried a pang of irony. Sylvia wasn't sure she truly belonged here. She had never felt at home, not really. She yearned to say something, to voice the pent-up frustration of years spent enduring abuse. But fear kept her silent. If she told him too much, if she revealed the full extent of her struggles, or worse, her secret, she risked stirring up something she couldn't control. So she lowered her gaze once again. Thank you, she whispered. Rowan nodded, then turned to go, but paused. Something in him seemed to wrestle with unspoken thoughts. Finally he said, If you ever need help, if anything's wrong, find me. You don't have to face this alone. Then, as though the admission had been more than he intended to reveal, he left in a purposeful stride, his posture stiff. Sylvia stared after him, her mind swirling. She realized that her knees felt weak, as though her body couldn't reconcile the Alpha's unexpected kindness. She wondered what might be going through his head, why he took the time to ask after an Omega. Part of her wanted to chase him down, to pour out her gratitude, even to beg for some measure of protection. But another part of her clung stubbornly to the survival instincts that had kept her safe thus far. Secrecy was her shield, and she wasn't about to lower it just because Rowan had shown a modicum of compassion. The next few days continued in a similar pattern. Rowan disappeared into council sessions during most daylight hours. In the evenings, the Betas arranged smaller gatherings to celebrate his return or hold ceremonial acknowledgments of the pack's fallen soldiers. Occasionally, Sylvia glimpsed him from across a room. Sometimes their eyes would meet briefly, and he would offer a slight nod. No words were exchanged, but it was enough to make her chest tighten. Meanwhile, the rest of the pack noticed that Rowan seemed more attuned to the day-to-day injustices inflicted on lower-ranking members. He intervened twice more, once to stop a Beta from berating a kitchen helper for a minor mistake, and another time to question why an Omega was made to carry an unreasonable load of supplies alone. Rumor spread that Rowan had threatened to revoke privileges for any Betas caught harassing Omegas. The shift in mood was palpable, though not everyone welcomed it. Some Betas muttered that Rowan was too soft, that the lower ranks needed to know their place, but none dared to challenge him directly. In the midst of these changes, Sylvia worked tirelessly, her anxiety building. It was only a matter of time before Rowan's presence uncovered the pack's hidden truths, the oppression that had been allowed to flourish in his absence. She sensed the tension in the eyes of Omegas who dared hope for a better life. She also sensed a growing resentment in those Betas who had grown used to lording over weaker wolves. Conflict simmered beneath the surface, waiting for a spark. That spark ignited late one night, when Sylvia had nearly finished her duties. She had gone to the storage room in the main house to fetch clean towels, and as she turned to leave, she found herself cornered by Jackson, the same beta who had tormented her for years. She could smell the faint stench of alcohol wafting off him. He was clearly emboldened by frustration that Rowan's clampdown on bullying tarnished Jackson's sense of superiority. He sneered, blocking her path. "You think you can hide behind the Alpha's new rules," he hissed. "Think you're special now? That you can get us in trouble just by batting your eyelashes?" His eyes glittered with malevolence. She tried to back away, but he slammed his hand against the wall, preventing her retreat. "I've been waiting to teach you your place," he snarled. Sylvia's heart thundered. She considered calling for help, but she knew few would risk crossing a beta. Even with Rowan's new stance, the older pack habits were deeply ingrained. "Leave me alone," she mustered, her voice trembling. Her wolf instincts flared, urging her to run or fight back, but she knew Jackson was physically stronger. Her only chance might be to slip away somehow. She tried to duck under his arm, but he caught her by the wrist, twisting it painfully. "I'm not done," he growled. The smell of his fury and inebriation assaulted her senses. "You think Rowan's going to come to your rescue again? He's not even here right now. He's busy dealing with real pack matters, not worthless omegas like you." She bit her lip to keep from crying out. The last thing she wanted was to cause a commotion and risk more trouble, yet panic surged. She felt the old survival instincts kicking in. Memories of past abuse flooded back, fueling a burst of adrenaline. She had to defend herself. But how? Then, from somewhere in the hallway, a familiar voice cut through the darkness. "Let her go." Rowan's tone was icily calm, yet the undercurrent of anger was unmistakable. Light footsteps approached as he stepped into view. His face was unreadable, but his eyes sparked with fierce disapproval. He took in the scene. Jackson's grip on Sylvia's wrist, her terrified expression, the tension crackling in the stale air. Jackson's bravado flickered. Still, he tried to maintain a snarl. "Alpha?" he said, forcing a semblance of respect. "I was just having a word with this Omega." "By terrorizing her?" Rowan replied, voice still low. He took a step forward, and that single step radiated such authority that Jackson's spine stiffened. "Release her. Now." For a split second, Jackson hesitated, and Sylvia's wrist throbbed in his hold. Then he let go. She pulled back, cradling her arm to her chest. Anger boiled beneath Rowan's measured exterior. "I'm sick of hearing reports about betas taking their frustrations out on omegas," he said, each syllable clipped. "You disregard my warnings. You disrespect the laws of this pack. You harm our own. Is that how you want to represent your rank?" Jackson's cheeks flushed with a mixture of fury and humiliation. He visibly trembled, but he offered no real defense. Rowan's dominance was too formidable to contest. Silence stretched. Finally, Rowan spoke again, addressing Jackson as though passing judgment. "Your behavior won't be tolerated. As of now, you're stripped of certain privileges. You will clean the training yard and the stables daily for the next 2 weeks. And if you ever lay a hand on an Omega again, you won't Chi-Ma. Remain in this pack." The sentence was final, heavy as a boulder. Jackson's mouth opened, but he snapped it shut, offering a curt nod before storming away, his steps echoing down the corridor. Sylvia's pulse still raced, her body trembling from the aftermath of fear. She realized that Rowan was looking at her, concern replacing his earlier sternness. "Are you hurt?" he asked softly, stepping closer. She shook her head, blinking away tears. "I'm fine," she said, though the stiffness in her wrist suggested otherwise. She tried not to let him see the slight wince as she attempted to flex her fingers. "Thank you for intervening." His jaw tightened. "I should have seen this coming," he said. "I've made it clear that tormenting omegas is unacceptable, but old habits die hard." He paused, studying her as though seeing her for the first time. The empathy in his gaze startled her. "I know this might not mean much," he went on, "but I promise I'm going to root out this cruelty. The pack can't move forward unless everyone feels safe." It was more sincerity than Sylvia had ever heard from a leader. She felt a strange twisting in her chest, an odd mixture of gratitude and wariness. After all, she was hiding a truth that, if exposed, could threaten everything. Could she trust this alpha, who was as fierce as the war stories claimed, and yet displayed compassion she had never known? She managed a soft, "thank you," aware that her cheeks had grown warm under his scrutiny. Their gazes locked for a moment in the dim hallway. She sensed the faint hum of awareness, a silent chord resonating between them. It made her breath hitch and her heartbeat flutter in an unfamiliar rhythm. The moment broke when a shout sounded from the courtyard, one of the elders calling for Rowan's attention. He stepped back, a reluctant shift in his expression, as though he wanted more time to speak with her. Then he inclined his head politely. "Rest, Omega. I'll handle the rest." He left swiftly, disappearing down the corridor. Only when he was out of sight did Sylvia inhale a shuddering breath. She placed a hand over her pounding heart, trying to steady herself. She did not know how long she stood there, overshadowed by the ghosts of her memories and the flickering of new hope. She forced herself to replay Rowan's words, searching for any hint of falsehood. She found none. Despite the shame she felt at needing help yet again, a tiny light of relief flickered in her chest. But fear coiled around it, reminding her that her secret was a ticking clock. If Rowan cared enough to notice her predicament, if he continued to protect her, eventually he might dig deeper. He might ask more questions. One slip, one moment of losing her guard, and he'd discover the monstrous truth she carried. Sylvia returned to her quarters, curling up on her cot. She stared into the darkness, torn between two possibilities. Keep her head down and remain invisible, or trust Rowan's kindness and risk the fragile defenses she had built. The latter choice made her heart race with the faint embers of longing for a better life, yet the rational part of her mind recoiled at the danger. She had no allies here, and the last thing she wanted was to drag an alpha into her personal storm. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by half-formed dreams in which Rowan's face blurred with the faces of those who had tormented her. She woke in the gray light of dawn, uncertain which was more terrifying, that he might abandon her or that he might truly see her. Over the next week, Rowan's presence continued to ripple through the pack, stirring currents both overt and concealed. Those who admired strength and honor began to gravitate toward him. Others, especially the more brutal betas, eyed him with a mixture of resentment and fear. The changes he implemented, reducing petty cruelties, attempting fair distribution of duties, met with resistance, but none dared open rebellion. Sylvia watched it all from the sidelines, her heart tight. She glimpsed Rowan less frequently, but every once in a while their paths crossed in the corridors or the courtyard, where he offered her the faintest nod, as though confirming he was still watching out for her. She felt uneasy about how aware of her he seemed to be, yet there was a quiet thrill too, something she tried to ignore for her own sake. Then, everything changed one afternoon, when the entire pack was called to gather in a clearing near the forest's edge. Sylvia joined the stream of omegas and betas moving across the fields, the older wolves whispering among themselves. An official announcement from Rowan was expected, possibly about the war's final treaty or a new arrangement for border patrols. A hush fell over the gathered wolves as Rowan stepped forward onto a small wooden dais erected beneath the tall pines. His voice carried easily over the crowd as he addressed them. He spoke of the war, how their forces had secured a truce, and how future negotiations aimed to keep the territory free from further conflict. A ripple of relief coursed through the pack. Then, his tone shifted, becoming more solemn. He spoke of restructuring the ranks, ensuring that fairness and unity were prioritized. That caused a more uneasy stirring among the betas, who had enjoyed near-limitless power over omegas. But Rowan's authority was not in question. He was the rightful alpha, and no one spoke out against him. At the close of his speech, the elder stepped up to present Rowan with a ceremonial sword, an emblem of leadership passed down through generations. Rowan accepted it, resting one hand on the pommel in a show of silent strength. Yet even as the crowd cheered, a sudden shift in the breeze carried new scents across the clearing. Sylvia lifted her nose, her wolf instincts flaring. Something was off. An unfamiliar presence lurked at the edge of the clearing. She wasn't the only one to notice. Rowan narrowed his eyes, stepping down from the dais to peer into the shadowy outlines of trees. A hush spread, the crowd going tense. A group of 5 or 6 figures emerged from the foliage, and the hush changed to wary murmurs. They were werewolves from a neighboring territory. Their spokesman, a tall, regal woman dressed in traveling leathers, inclined her head to Rowan. It was clear from the rigid stance of the betas that these arrivals were unexpected and unannounced. Sylvia watched from the back, feeling her heartbeat accelerate. She recognized the tension in the air. This might be a diplomatic visit, or something more ominous. Rowan moved forward to greet the newcomers. There was a hushed exchange. The visitors claimed they sought an audience with the new alpha, offering their congratulations on his return and the rumored success in the war. There was no aggression in their voices, yet Sylvia couldn't shake the sense of underlying tension. As the conversation progressed, snippets floated over the crowd, talk of treaties, alliances, resource sharing. The tension dimmed somewhat, replaced by curiosity. Perhaps these were prospective allies. The pack members began to relax, loosening their guarded stances. That was when the spokesman smiled politely and asked to pay respects to Rowan's beta circle. Rowan obliged, introducing each beta in turn. The visitors then inquired about the presence of any special rank wolves, like an oracle, healer, or an omega rumored to have unique capabilities. Sylvia's blood ran cold at the mention. She hoped her face remained just another in the crowd, but panic churned in her gut. Unique capabilities. The words sank like stones in her mind. Her breath caught. She swore she saw the woman's gaze sweep across the throng, searching. The elders stepped in, stammering about how their pack's omegas were not known for any unusual powers. They insisted that all specialized talents, such as healing, were under the purview of designated individuals who were accounted for. The visitors nodded politely, but something in the spokesman's expression suggested disappointment, or perhaps suspicion. Then, with graceful smiles, they announced they wouldn't overstay their welcome and would return soon to finalize talks of cooperation. The tension eased. Rowan shook hands with the woman, and the group departed, leaving the clearing in a swirl of uneasy murmuring. Sylvia's legs felt like jelly. She slipped back among the shuffling crowd, praying no one had noticed her quickening pulse or the chill sweat on her brow. She tried to calm herself with logic. The visitors had only asked a general question. It was a common enough inquiry when forging alliances, as different packs often boasted distinct talents. But in her case, it struck dangerously close to a truth she had fought hard to bury. A voice behind her made her jump. It was a middle-aged beta woman, muttering to a friend. That was strange, them asking about special omegas. Heard some packs try to breed for exotic traits, but it's more rumor than fact. Our omegas are just menial workers anyway. Sylvia quickened her pace to avoid overhearing more. She had to return to the main house and compose herself. She thanked the moon that no one had singled her out in that clearing. If Rowan or the elders discovered her ability, one she had been forced to keep hidden since childhood, the consequences would be grave. Especially now, with tensions so high and alliances at stake. She hurried toward a side door of the main house, unsteady relief flooding her system. Just as she reached the threshold, she collided with a solid chest. Looking up, she found Rowan standing there, brow furrowed as though lost in thought. Instantly her heart pounded so loud she was sure he could hear it. She stumbled backward, apologizing in a rush. "Alpha, I'm so sorry. I didn't see." He steadied her by the elbow, a reflex that sent warmth shooting through her arm. "It's all right," he said gently, but concern flickered in his eyes. "Are you in a hurry?" She swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice even. "Just wanted to get back to my duties." He released her elbow, yet he didn't step aside. Instead, his gaze searched her face. "I noticed you looked uneasy during that visit from our neighbors. Did something about them bother you?" His tone was calm, but she sensed a watchful edge, as though he had picked up on her fear. Sylvia told herself to lie smoothly, to shrug it off. It was a surprise to see outsiders. "I'm not used to visitors," she said, keeping her voice as steady as possible. "Just nerves, I guess." She kept her eyes lowered, afraid he might read her too easily. She didn't want him seeing the panic behind them. He exhaled as though concluding she was merely anxious about new faces. "There's likely nothing to worry about. They seemed interested in forming alliances, and that can only help us rebuild after the war." He spoke with a quiet conviction, though a trace of doubt lingered. She sensed that he, too, might have reservations about their unexpected arrival. "Nevertheless," he added, "I want everyone in the pack on alert in case anything unusual happens. If you see or hear anything suspicious, let me know immediately." She nodded quickly, heart hammering. "Yes, Alpha." She edged around him, seeking the sanctuary of the hallway beyond. He didn't stop her, but she could feel his eyes on her back. Once out of sight, she leaned against the wall, breathing shakily. She had to be more careful. The slightest slip could unravel her. She tried to focus on her tasks, but a knot of anxiety lodged in her chest. The rest of the day passed in a blur of chores, whispered rumors about the visitors, and speculation on the new treaties. Sylvia kept her head down, though she couldn't escape the sense that Rowan was becoming more attuned to her every passing mood. She felt his gaze a few more times, his curiosity as potent as his protective instinct. Night fell, bringing with it a storm that rattled the windows. Rain pounded against the shutters, and thunder rolled in the distance. Sylvia finished her final duty of cleaning the upstairs corridor, then retreated to the servants' quarters. Most of the other Omegas had already gone to bed. She sank onto her cot, wiping away droplets of water that had dripped from her hair. Exhaustion tugged at her eyelids, but the swirling fear in her mind refused to let her rest. She closed her eyes, recalling how the visitors had asked about specialized Omegas. They can't possibly know, she thought, unless someone told them. But who would? She had guarded her secret fiercely. Could they have heard rumors from beyond the territory? She remembered fleeting glimpses of her childhood, the reason she had been exiled to this pack in the first place. The memory made her chest constrict with shame and dread. Eventually, she dozed off, only to be jolted awake by a nightmare. She thought she heard voices in the night, pressing her about her powers, demanding she display them. She woke with a gasp, drenched in sweat, only to realize it was still dark outside. Dawn was hours away. Rain continued to lash the roof. She sat up, hugging her knees, trying to steady the frantic rhythm of her heart. I need to calm down. She decided some fresh air might help clear her mind, so she wrapped a thin cloak around her shoulders and quietly crept outside. The storm had lessened but still lingered, the sky a tumult of dark clouds. Lightning occasionally lit the horizon, and the wind carried the scent of wet pine. Sylvia found her way to a small covered porch at the back of the main house, far from the watchful eyes of the betas. She stood there, listening to the dripping eaves and letting the cool wind brush across her cheeks. She told herself she was safe for now. No one in the pack had ever even hinted at her hidden ability. The secret was hers alone, buried deep. Yet even as she tried to reassure herself, an uncomfortable awareness flickered in her mind. She was not merely the pack's weakest omega. She was the one who had stifled her own powers, who had learned to appear meek and unremarkable so that no one would suspect. The memory of that night years ago, when her abilities had manifested out of fear and desperation, still brought shivers. The destruction she had nearly caused, the panic that led her guardians to hide her away, it all felt like a brand she would never escape. A movement at the corner of her vision startled her. She turned, heart leaping, only to see Rowan standing a short distance away, partially shielded by a stone arch. He seemed lost in thought, gaze fixed on the stormy sky. How had she not noticed his presence? She froze, torn between wanting to slip away before he spotted her, and an inexplicable urge to stay, drawn by the strange comfort his presence brought. Then he turned, meeting her eyes. She tensed, wondering if she was about to be scolded for being out after hours. Instead, he gave a faint half-smile and gestured for her to come closer so they wouldn't have to shout over the wind. The arch provided partial shelter, though raindrops still blew in sideways. She hesitated, but something in his expression was inviting. Reluctantly, she stepped beneath the arch, keeping a cautious distance. "Stormy night," he said, voice low. Lightning flashed briefly, illuminating his features. In that moment, he looked tired, as if the weight of leadership pressed heavily on him. "Couldn't sleep?" Sylvia shook her head, uncertain how to respond. The gentle hush of the rain surrounded them. She felt oddly vulnerable, standing so close to him in the darkness. I woke up," she admitted softly. "Needed some air." He nodded, as though understanding her restlessness. "Me too," he said simply. "Too many thoughts to sleep." She risked a quick glance at him. "Is something troubling you?" The question spilled out before she could remind herself that it wasn't her place to inquire about the alpha's state of mind. Rowan didn't seem offended. He ran a hand through his dark hair, damp from the storm. "A lot is on my mind," he conceded. "Negotiations, the reorganization of the pack, ensuring our borders remain safe, and the knowledge that not everyone is pleased by my return." He exhaled. "I sense resistance, the old guard clinging to their ways. Bullying, exploitation. That's not the pack I want to lead." Sylvia heard the quiet frustration in his tone. Against her better judgment, she spoke. "Change is hard. Some wolves thrive on having power over those weaker than them. They won't let go easily." His sharp gaze flicked to her, and she worried she'd said too much. But his expression softened. "That's exactly what concerns me. And you've experienced their cruelty firsthand." There was a beat of silence, filled only by the steady patter of rain. Then Rowan stepped closer, his presence enveloping her, though he didn't touch her. "I'm sorry," he said, voice barely above a whisper. I should have been here to prevent it. Maybe I could have stopped it sooner. His words caught her off guard. She had never heard an alpha apologize so directly for the hardships of a low-ranking wolf. A swirl of emotion tightened her throat. She lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes. Thunder rumbled overhead as she considered her next words. You couldn't have known, she finally managed. You were away, doing what was required for the pack. You have nothing to apologize for. He watched her for a long moment, something unspoken flickering in his gaze. His lips parted as if he wanted to say more, to delve deeper into the reasons behind her quiet pain. Then he caught himself, as if uncertain of stepping across a line. Instead, he shifted, looking out at the night. The tension between them lingered, a taut string thrumming with unacknowledged intensity. Finally, she cleared her throat. I should go back inside, she whispered, though she made no immediate move to leave. Some part of her was reluctant to break whatever fragile connection formed in the hush of the storm. Rowan nodded, stepping aside to give her space. Of course, he said, keeping his voice low. As she slipped past, he added, If you can't sleep, you can come back here to think. I might be around. There was a gentle warmth in his tone that surprised her. A faint, involuntary smile touched Sylvia's lips, though doubt tugged at her. She murmured, Thank you, then hurried away, heart pounding. She felt his presence behind her like a promise unspoken, a reassurance she'd never dared hope for in an alpha. Yet fear wrapped around her hope like a coil of thorns. She could not allow herself to trust too deeply. The more Rowan offered kindness, the more she risked letting slip the secret that could ruin everything. The days continued to roll onward, the storm subsiding into clearer skies. Rowan's leadership strengthened, and the pack's daily life began to show signs of improvement for Omegas. Fewer scuffles broke out in the corridors. Even Jackson kept his distance, his pride still smarting from Rowan's reprimand. Whenever Sylvia passed him, he glowered but refused to engage. The shift felt almost too good to be true. She tried to keep her thoughts distant, her emotions guarded, yet she found it increasingly difficult to ignore the stirring in her chest whenever she caught Rowan's eye. Even in her dreams, he often appeared as a comforting figure, overshadowing the nightmares of her past. Then came the night that would shatter the precarious balance she had so carefully maintained. It started innocently enough, a mild evening, the scent of wildflowers drifting across the yard. Rowan had called a gathering in the great hall to celebrate the progress they'd made as a pack, and to lay out preliminary plans for an official peace treaty. Most betas and elders attended. Sylvia and the other Omegas served drinks and arranged platters of food in preparation. The mood in the hall was lighter than it had been in recent memory. Music played softly, and wolves conversed in friendly tones. Laughter punctuated the warm candlelight. It almost felt like a new era was dawning. Sylvia moved among the crowd with practiced grace, distributing fresh bread and savory dishes. She caught glimpses of Rowan at the head of the room, engaged in conversation with the elders. She marveled at how he seemed so at ease, yet always keenly aware of his surroundings. At one point, their gazes met across the room, and a knowing look passed between them. She blushed, hastily lowering her eyes. The memory of their midnight encounter, under the storm, haunted her thoughts. She wondered if he recalled it as vividly as she did. As the evening wore on, the energy in the hall grew more festive. Wolves began to dance, forming playful circles. Omegas were sometimes invited by betas to join in a show of goodwill. Sylvia was offered a dance by a polite young beta who, though awkward, seemed genuinely friendly. She accepted, hoping to pass unnoticed in the swirl of movement. The group dance was a chance to blend in, to let the pack's communal spirit wash away her anxieties, if only for a few moments. It was during that dance that everything took a dangerous turn. She caught a sharp scent in the air, an unmistakable hint of aggression. Her wolf senses perked up, scanning the crowd. She saw Jackson across the hall, glaring at her with something that looked like barely restrained fury. Then she noticed Rowan, eyes fixed on Jackson, evidently aware of the tension. A flicker of alarm raced through her. Had something happened to provoke Jackson's rage, or was he simply stewing over the pack's changing dynamics? Suddenly, Jackson pulled away from the group he was talking to and approached the dancers. His posture radiated hostility. He grabbed a mug of ale from a passing tray, took a swig, then shoved his way into the dance circle. The dancers stumbled aside in confusion. Sylvia's partner tensed, uncertain how to react. Jackson smirked, then reached out to snatch Sylvia's wrist, yanking her away from the circle. The music screeched to a halt as onlookers froze. Heat flared in Sylvia's body, terror rising. She saw Rowan across the hall, his eyes blazing, pushing through the crowd. But Jackson held her in a grip that felt painfully tight. He was drunk, obviously fueled by resentment. "So?" He sneered in a slurred voice. "Alpha wants all the betas to play nice with you worthless omegas. Well, I'm not giving up my rights. I won't dance to his tune just because he says so." Sylvia tried to pry herself free, panic pounding in her veins. She could sense Jackson's frustration building to a breaking point. Before she could speak, Rowan's voice rang out, commanding and furious. "Let her go, Jackson." Jackson ignored him, his gaze locked on Sylvia. "You think you can hide behind Rowan's reforms? Think a new alpha can erase what you really are? You're still weak, still nothing." His hand tightened around her wrist, pain blossoming. She let out a sharp cry, tears stinging her eyes. In a blink, Rowan was there, gripping Jackson's arm with iron force. With a single twist, he loosened Jackson's hold on Sylvia and shoved him away. She stumbled back, rubbing her bruised skin, her breath shaky. A ring of stunned wolves surrounded them, some betas grimacing, others simply watching in shock. Rowan stood between Sylvia and Jackson, fists clenched, every inch of him screaming protective rage. "You have overstepped every boundary," he growled, voice low and lethal. "Stand down." Jackson's eyes were wild, fed by liquor and a bruised ego. "She's worthless," he spat, pointing at Sylvia with trembling rage. "Why are you protecting her? She's a disgrace to the pack, the lowest of the low." "An alpha siding with an omega is unnatural." Rowan lunged, grabbing Jackson by the front of his shirt. The entire room held its breath. Sylvia's heart hammered, fear warring with something else, a strange mix of dread and relief that Rowan was stepping in. She could feel the hair on the back of her neck rise, the tension climbing to a dangerous pitch. If Jackson continued, he might end up banished, or worse. Before Rowan could speak again, Jackson made a fateful choice. He swung his fist at Rowan, though it was sloppy and fueled by desperation. Rowan easily deflected the blow, slamming Jackson down onto a nearby table with staggering strength. Dishes crashed, the table splintering under the impact. Gasps erupted around the hall. In that moment, Jackson's eyes gleamed with a twisted sort of realization. "Look at you," he rasped, coughing. "Defending that omega like she's something precious. Are you sure you're not hiding something, Rowan? Why else would you care so much about a worthless piece of—" Rowan let out a roar. The primal sound reverberated through the hall. His alpha wolf surged, and everyone in the room felt the authority radiating off him. Jackson, half conscious on the broken table, stared up at Rowan with dawning terror. Rowan's eyes were fully shifted, the usual color replaced by a gold glow that signaled the wolf within was mere seconds from ripping Jackson apart. "You dare question me?" he snarled. "You dare insult a packmate under my protection." Sylvia stood trembling, tears sliding down her cheeks. She sensed the entire night unraveling. She wanted to cry out for Rowan to stop, to keep from doing something irreversible, but the words stuck in her throat. Through the blur, she realized something else was happening. An electric charge in the air, swirling around Rowan and zeroing in on her. She felt an inexorable pull, like a magnet drawing her closer. The raw emotion, the fury, the protective instinct, she recognized what it all meant. A few startled gasps among the watchers suggested they, too, sensed the sudden shift in energy. It was the manifestation of a mate bond, primal and undeniable. A hush fell as wolves recognized the aura emanating from Rowan, an unmistakable sign of a fated tie. Sylvia's heart nearly stopped. This couldn't be happening. She couldn't be Rowan's mate. It was impossible, ludicrous, dangerous. Her mind reeled, grappling with the revelation that threatened her carefully constructed life of anonymity. Rowan's breathing was ragged. He froze, still pinning Jackson, and his gaze whipped around the room until it locked on Sylvia. She felt her stomach clench violently. In that instant, she saw realization dawn in his eyes. A wave of shock washed over his features, soon followed by awe, then conflict. He released Jackson, who slumped to the floor, dazed. Rowan took 2 steps toward Sylvia, ignoring the entire pack that stood watching in breathless anticipation. "You," he began, voice hoarse. "You're my—" She stumbled backward, instinct screaming at her to run. The secret she had guarded for so long was overshadowed by this new, breathtaking reality. She shook her head, tears streaming. "No," she whispered in panic. "No, you can't want me. You've ignored me all these years. Rowan's face was etched with turmoil. She saw his wolf swirling beneath the surface of his eyes, instincts raging to claim her, to confirm the bond. The crowd murmured, shock morphing into excitement and confusion. A number of betas looked outraged or stunned that an omega could be the alpha's mate. The elders exchanged wary glances, uncertain how to handle the revelation. Sylvia couldn't breathe. She was trapped beneath the weight of 1,000 stares, pinned by Rowan's powerful aura. The more she tried to deny it, the stronger the mate bond felt, its invisible threads weaving between them, pulling her inexorably closer. Her wolf side howled in her mind, longing to accept him, to surrender to the flood of emotion. But fear slammed down like a steel door. She recalled every time the pack had tormented her, every bruise, every threat. Where had Rowan been then? Off at war, yes, but the pack that bore his name had nearly crushed her spirit. And she had her deadly secret, one that could shatter everything. She turned on her heel and bolted, ignoring the gasps and calls behind her. She couldn't face Rowan or the crowd for a second longer. She needed to escape, to find solitude, to make sense of the heartbreak and relief and terror surging through her veins. Her bare feet pounded the ground as she fled the great hall. She sprinted into the cool night, tears streaming down her cheeks. Stumbling into the courtyard, she paused only to catch her breath, her chest heaving. The stars above provided faint light, the moon half hidden by drifting clouds. She heard commotion from inside, but she dared not return. Suddenly, Rowan appeared in the archway behind her, eyes searching the darkness. He was fast, the bond guiding him as much as his keen sense of smell. "Wait," he called, voice unsteady with pent-up emotion. "Please, don't run. Let me." She shook her head vehemently, stepping away. "Stay back," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "I can't. We can't do this. Not after everything that's happened." Rowan hesitated, anguish etched into his features. He took one step closer, raising his palms in a sign of peace. "I know this is sudden," he murmured, "and that you have every reason to mistrust me and the pack. But you feel it as strongly as I do, don't you? This bond." She swallowed a sob. "You never noticed me," she said brokenly. "You never saw how they treated me, never questioned what happened to the Omegas. You left, and now you want to claim me as your mate? Like that erases the years of being invisible, worthless in your territory's eyes?" His eyes flickered with pain. "I don't expect you to forget or forgive so easily," he said. "I want to make amends, to protect you, to show you that things can change. That I have changed." The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. A swirl of anger and longing twisted in her chest. She took another halting step back, mindful of the fact that he could close the distance in an instant if he chose. "I can't," she whispered. "You don't know everything. You don't know me." Her voice cracked. "I'm not just any Omega. There's something else. Something that would make you regret claiming me." His eyes flashed with confusion and concern, as though her words made him want to gather her in his arms and demand answers. But he held himself in check, as if sensing she might flee if he pushed. "Tell me," he pleaded softly, his tone raw with worry. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." Sylvia trembled, tears burning her eyes. She yearned to spill the truth, to unburden herself of the secret that had tormented her for so long. Yet that old terror rose like a specter, warning her of the consequences. "If he knew, if the pack discovered you say that," she choked out. "But the reality is different. I can't bring you into this. I won't risk it." Before he could respond, she turned and ran again, forcing her legs to move despite the pain in her chest. The bond tugged at her heart, but she fought it, determined not to subject Rowan to the darkness she carried. She dashed past the gates, into the woods, ignoring the calls of alarm from behind. She had to get away, to think, to decide whether she could stay in a pack where her mate was also her alpha. An alpha who, despite his newfound kindness, had once been absent while she suffered. The looming question of her secret overshadowed all else. Slipping deeper into the forest, heart pounding, Sylvia let out a ragged sob. Everything she had carefully built to survive her life as the weakest Omega was unraveling. And as she veered into the trees, she realized that no matter how far she ran, the mate bond would haunt her. She might outrun the pack's territory lines, but she couldn't outrun the truth written in her own soul. She belonged to Rowan, and he belonged to her. Sylvia's breath came in ragged gasps as she darted deeper into the moonlit forest, branches snagging at her threadbare dress. Panic drove her forward, though she wasn't entirely sure where she was going. Her only thought was to put as much distance as possible between herself and Rowan, whose determined voice still echoed in her ears. The mate bond had flared to life in that shocking moment back in the Great Hall, enveloping both of them in a wave of undeniable recognition. She could still feel it, the invisible thread tying her spirit to his, pulling with a gentle but unrelenting force. Her wolf sighed, yearned to turn back, to acknowledge the fated connection, and seek solace in Rowan's embrace. Yet her rational mind, honed by years of hardship, demanded she keep running. He was the alpha, leader of a pack that had rarely shown her mercy. And what if he uncovered the truth of her hidden power? The very idea made her stomach twist. She wasn't ready to trust that Rowan, or anyone, would accept her once that secret came to light. Fear pounded in her chest like a drum, fueling her frantic footsteps. Eventually, she slowed near a river winding through the forest, its waters glimmering beneath stray beams of moonlight. The rush of the current offered a semblance of calm. Heart hammering, she crouched by the bank and splashed cold water on her face. Her tears mingled with the droplets, and she let out a shaky exhale. This wasn't the first time she had run from danger in this territory, but never before had she fled with such turmoil gnawing at her insides. Her thoughts spun toward the night's revelations. Rowan had called her his mate in front of everyone, his protective fury shining through as he pinned Jackson. The pack must be in an uproar, whispering about how the new alpha's fated partner was a lowly omega. She imagined the shock on the elders' faces, the outraged stares of the betas, and the uncertain glances from her fellow omegas. It was as if a cosmic joke had been played on them all. Perhaps that was how Rowan felt too. Yet each time she pictured his face, the memory of his pain and fierce determination softened her bitterness. He hadn't forced her to accept him, hadn't tried to wrestle her into submission. Instead, he had pleaded for her trust. That was not the action of an alpha bent on cruelty. It was something else entirely. A snap of the twig jolted her from her thoughts. She whirled, nerves on edge. The forest was thick, and the scents of wet foliage and night-blooming flowers mingled around her. She could sense a presence just beyond a stand of saplings. Her heart kicked into a gallop. She recognized Rowan's scent before he emerged from the shadows. Candlelight from the distant hall had left her eyes dazzled, but here under the moon she could make out his outline. Tall, imposing, yet oddly hesitant. His posture spoke of caution, as though he feared spooking her further. "I followed your scent," he said softly. Moonlight reflected in his eyes, accenting the gold flecks that marked him as alpha. "Forgive me for intruding. I needed to make sure you were safe." He kept his distance, hands loosely at his sides. Sylvia's grip on the riverbank tightened. Part of her wanted to stand and leave again, but her legs felt shaky. She realized how exhausted she was, how her ankles throbbed from sprinting. "You shouldn't be here," she managed, voice hoarse. "Everyone will be looking for you." He shook his head. "Let them. I had to find you." His gaze flicked toward the swirling water. "I didn't want you to be alone after everything." Silence fell, broken only by the river's gentle rush. Finally, Rowan took a slow step closer, as though testing the ground for traps. "I won't hurt you," he said in a low, steady tone. "You have my word." She believed him on some instinctual level. The mate bond wove a trust that defied logic, but that trust clashed with her hard-earned caution. She rose on unsteady legs, brushing away stray leaves clinging to her dress. "It's not just about being hurt," she said, a hitch in her breath. "It's about what this means, this bond. You're the alpha, I'm an omega. And I have something inside me that you don't understand." Rowan's chest rose and fell with deliberate slowness, controlling his own swirl of emotions. "I can't pretend to understand all you've been through," he said. "But you're more than just an omega to me. The bond doesn't care about rank. It only knows who belongs together. Her eyes prickled with fresh tears, a mixture of yearning and dread. If you knew the truth, she said, swallowing hard, you might change your mind. She thought of the flicker of destructive energy she had once unleashed, the reason she lived in constant fear of discovery. Then help me understand, he murmured, voice carrying a gentle plea. We can keep it between us, if that's what you need. I just can't bear to see you so afraid. Something in his tone, so genuine, so raw, nearly undid her. She found herself wavering, the urge to reveal everything warring with the terror of rejection. At last, she looked away, focusing on a cluster of moss-covered rocks by the river's edge. I'm not ready, she whispered. Rowan waited a heartbeat, then nodded, though disappointment glimmered in his eyes. All right, he said, voice rough. I won't force you to speak about it, but I will keep you safe, no matter what, even if you don't accept the bond yet. She closed her eyes, letting that promise sink in. It felt like a fragile shield against the hostile stares she knew awaited her back in the pack's stronghold. Why would you do that? She asked, chest aching with confusion. You barely know me. He took another step closer, careful not to corner her. I wish I had known you sooner, he said quietly. I see how this pack treated you. I see the bruises, both visible and hidden. And now that I'm Alpha, I can't stand by while anyone is harmed. He paused, swallowing. Not my mate. The word mate echoed in her mind, conjuring a dizzying rush of warmth and longing. Her wolf side howled within, urging her to accept him, to let him be her protector and partner. But Sylvia's human reasoning stayed guarded. Eventually, she nodded, tears slipping free despite her attempts to contain them. I'm still not sure, she admitted. But I can't stay out here all night. Rowan inclined his head. Then come back, he said softly. On your own terms. You can walk beside me, or behind me if that feels safer. I won't try to hold you too close. The swirl of emotions in his eyes betrayed how difficult it was for him to keep that promise, given the mate bond that undoubtedly thrummed in his veins as strongly as it did in hers. For a few tense seconds, Sylvia stared at the river, listening to its soft gurgle, allowing the night air to cool her fevered thoughts. Finally, she turned toward him. All right, she agreed. But I don't want a big scene. Can we just slip back quietly? Rowan nodded, relief evident in his posture. Yes, he said. Let's go. They navigated through the forest in a silence that felt fragile, yet oddly reassuring, maintaining a few paces between them so neither felt trapped. Whenever the moonlight glanced off Rowan's features, Sylvia caught glimpses of the concern etched there. He genuinely worried for her. The idea of an alpha caring about an omega so intimately contradicted everything she had experienced in the pack. Still, something in the warm cadence of his voice and the protective air he exuded made her believe that perhaps he truly was different. When they reached the edge of the pack's territory, where the stone walls and watchtowers stood, the distant glow of torches cast the courtyard in a swaying golden light. Groups of startled wolves who had seen her run off were milling about, apparently unsure whether to organize a search party. A few snapped their heads in Rowan's direction, presumably ready to hail their alpha. But he lifted one hand in a subtle gesture, indicating there would be no further confrontation tonight. Most of them took the hint. While some betas bowed respectfully, others regarded Sylvia with wide-eyed disbelief. That they would see her re-entering the gates with Rowan likely confirmed every rumor about the mate bond. Sylvia's cheeks burned, and she hugged herself in an attempt to appear smaller. She wished she could vanish into the darkness before anyone's stares could pierce her. But Rowan, in a show of calm authority, guided her toward a side entrance near the servants' quarters. He didn't touch her, though she could sense the protective aura radiating from him. Through the hush of midnight, they reached the simple wooden door that led into the cramped hall where the Omegas slept. Pausing by the threshold, Rowan glanced around, ensuring no one stood nearby to intrude on their conversation. His gaze landed on Sylvia's face. "I'll see to it no one bothers you," he said. "In the morning, there will be questions. About us." He swallowed, as if testing the weight of that reality. "I'll handle them. Take as much time as you need." Sylvia nodded mutely, overwhelmed by exhaustion, longing, and dread. She whispered, "Thank you, Alpha," unable to call him by name without choking on the emotions tangled in her throat. A flicker of regret flashed across Rowan's features. "I wish you'd call me something else," he said in a low voice, almost too soft to hear. But he left it at that. With a final nod of acknowledgement, he turned and slipped back into the torchlit courtyard. Sylvia watched him go, her chest tight, aware that the next day's dawn would bring changes she could hardly fathom. Quietly, she entered the hallway. Most of the other Omegas were already in bed, and the hush was total save for the muffled sighs of slumber. She tiptoed to her small cot, collapsed onto the thin mattress, and curled into a ball, mind whirling. The bond tugged at her heart with a steady pulse, a reminder that her fate was now entwined with Rowan's. She wanted to resent him, to blame him for her years of suffering under his father's reign and the subsequent neglect. Yet the memory of his earnest gaze, his gentle promise of protection, made bitterness difficult to maintain. Before sleep finally claimed her, she tried to recall her hidden power, the terrifying surge that had once shattered everything. If Rowan discovered that side of her, would his acceptance remain? Or would he recoil, realizing that his mate carried a burden she herself could barely control? The uncertainty gnawed at her, even in her dreams. Morning brought a cautious hush to the entire pack. Sylvia woke to the familiar sounds of Omegas rustling about, preparing for their daily chores. Yet their voices held an extra note of tension, as though they all sensed that something seismic had shifted overnight. When she rose from her cot, she met Elena's worried gaze. The other Omega parted her lips, seeming to want to ask a dozen questions, but no words came. The weight of the rumors must have reached every corner of the servants' quarters. Sylvia lowered her eyes, feeling the heat of embarrassment crawl up her neck. With a quick, stiff nod, she left to wash herself and dress for the day. She selected the least tattered garment she owned, a faded green tunic that she belted at the waist. It was still humble, but she sensed the pack's stares might be even more intense now that her status was uncertain. After a bracing splash of cold water to banish her grogginess, she stepped into the corridor. Minutes later, as she passed through the central courtyard on her way to the kitchens, she spotted a small congregation of wolves, betas, elders, and a few curious onlookers. Anxiety spiked when she realized Rowan was speaking to them in a low, measured tone. His gaze alighted on her the moment she emerged. The entire group turned to stare. A hush enveloping them, heart pounding. Sylvia braced herself for ridicule or interrogation. Rowan cleared his throat. "That's enough," he said, calmly dismissing the crowd. "Return to your tasks. There will be no harassment of any pack member. Is that clear?" His voice carried a note of iron. Some lowered their heads in acknowledgement. Others frowned or scurried away. The elders exchanged meaningful looks, but said nothing to contradict him. One by one, they dispersed, leaving Rowan standing alone at the courtyard's edge. Sylvia hesitated before walking toward the kitchen. She could practically feel Rowan's eyes on her, but she was too intimidated to approach him in front of everyone. Instead, she slipped past, hoping to maintain her routine. She had barely stepped into the kitchen's threshold when the cook, whose usual scowl held a hint of begrudging caution, beckoned her over. "You're late," the woman hissed, though not with her typical fervor. It seemed she now thought twice about berating Sylvia too loudly. "I'm sorry," Sylvia muttered. "I was delayed." The cook pursed her lips, as if debating how bold she could be with the new alpha's mate. In the end, she simply sighed and handed Sylvia a damp cloth. "Wipe the counters. Then help peel vegetables. We're short-staffed because some of the others ran off to gawk at the courtyard drama." Sylvia breathed a small sigh of relief. At least, for the moment, she had simple work to keep her mind occupied. She set to cleaning, scrubbing the wide wooden countertops with firm strokes, listening to the bustle of the busy kitchen. Pots clanged, water hissed, and hushed chatter floated around her. A few times, she overheard whispers. An omega mate for the alpha? Unheard of. Maybe it's a sign of change, or a curse. Who knows? Sylvia forced herself not to react. She focused on the repetitive task of peeling and slicing vegetables. One of the older Omega helpers sidled over, offering a tentative smile. I think it's good," the woman said in a low voice. "Gives the rest of us hope that maybe the pack will be kinder." Sylvia managed a faint nod, though an ache rose in her throat. She appreciated the sentiment, but the idea of being a beacon of hope felt overwhelming. She was still grappling with her own fears. Trying to form a reply, she paused at the sound of footsteps approaching. A hush fell over the kitchen staff as Rowan himself stepped in, prompting half the room to bow their heads. Sylvia's pulse quickened. "I'd like a word," Rowan said, gaze sweeping until it landed on her. He didn't bark or command, but his intent was clear. The cook hastily retreated, leaving Sylvia in the center of the kitchen with Rowan standing near the doorway. She set down her knife, wiping her hands on her apron. The onlookers pretended to be busy with tasks, though she could feel their curious stares. Rowan extended a hand toward the rear exit, a silent request for her to accompany him somewhere more private. She swallowed and followed, heart pounding. Outside, they walked a short distance into a small herb garden, enclosed by a low stone wall. Aromas of rosemary, thyme, and basil filled the air, mingling with the crisp morning breeze. Once they were alone, he faced her, posture self-conscious, yet determined. "I didn't mean to disrupt your work," he said quietly. "But we need to address this." He gestured between them, as if grasping at words to describe the bond that had set the entire pack on edge. Sylvia braced herself. "I know," she said, hugging her arms protectively. "What do you plan to do?" Her mind flitted to the possibility of an official announcement, a formal ceremony. Such an event would be standard if an alpha found his mate. But the mere thought made her stomach twist with anxiety. She wasn't ready for that kind of scrutiny. Rowan exhaled. "I've already spoken to the Council of Elders. They're concerned about how the pack will react, but they can't deny the mate bond. Tradition dictates we announce it publicly soon. Yet, I told them we would wait. I won't force calm. You, into any ceremony." Her eyes widened. She expected him to mention some looming formal claim, or to insist on a union in front of the entire pack. But here he was, offering her a choice. It touched her in a way she hadn't anticipated, and a rush of conflicting feelings welled up inside. "Thank you," she whispered. I can't handle that yet. He nodded, searching her face. I understand, but if the pack needs clarity. Tensions are high, especially with some betas resenting my stance on protecting lower ranks. And then there's the matter of those outsiders who visited. There's talk they may arrive again soon. The mention of the visitors made her skin prickle. She recalled how they had inquired about special omegas, their searching gaze passing over the crowd. They might want to see the new alpha and his mate, Sylvia guessed. Fear lurked beneath the surface of her words. Yes, Rowan said grimly. And more than that. I suspect they're trying to gauge our pack's strengths and weaknesses. If they sense internal conflict, they might exploit it. The last thing we need is another conflict right after we settled the war. Sylvia's eyes darted to a cluster of herb blossoms nodding in the wind. What do you need from me? She asked, her voice tinged with resignation. She hated that fate was pushing her into the spotlight. Rowan hesitated, letting the hush of the herb garden stretch. At last he spoke. For now, can you simply stay close enough that I can protect you if something goes wrong? I know you want your freedom, your space, that I'd feel more at ease knowing you're not left vulnerable to betas like Jackson. At the mention of Jackson, Sylvia instinctively touched the bruised spot on her wrist. She remembered the fiery rage in Jackson's eyes, the hate he felt at being publicly shamed. Despite Rowan's punishments, she knew Jackson wouldn't easily forget. She gave a slow nod. I don't want to be a burden, but I understand. His lips twitched in the faintest of smiles. You're not a burden, he said softly. Then, as though catching himself revealing too much, he stepped back. All right. Let's see how the next few days unfold. If you need anything, come to me. A moment passed. He seemed to wrestle with a fleeting impulse, perhaps the urge to take her hand or smooth back a stray hair, but he held still, respecting the distance she maintained. Finally, with a brief incline of his head, he turned and left her among the fragrant herbs. Sylvia watched him go, heat fluttering low in her belly. She sensed the bond steadily thrumming, urging her to trust him. But the specter of her secret hung over every hopeful thought, reminding her that complete acceptance might be impossible. As the next few days slipped by, an uneasy calm settled over the pack. The betas acted with a forced civility whenever Rowan was present, though resentment simmered in some corners. The omegas, meanwhile, eyed Sylvia with wonder and caution. Some seemed encouraged that an omega could hold such a place of honor, while others worried that the backlash could fall on them if this new arrangement faltered. For her part, Sylvia tried to keep busy. She was assigned duties in the main house, where Rowan kept an office of sorts, a modest study where he conferred with visiting scouts or hammered out supply routes. Despite her reservations, being stationed near him brought unexpected comfort. Sometimes she glimpsed him leaning over maps, brow furrowed in concentration. Other times, he paced restlessly, barking orders to messenger wolves who arrived with reports about border security. Whenever he spotted her in the hall, a faint light sparked in his eyes. Though he said little in front of others, she appreciated his restraint, the way he allowed her to remain in a safe background until she felt ready for something more. One afternoon, while she was organizing ledgers on a small desk outside Rowan's study, he stepped out and quietly closed the door behind him. Mind taking a walk with me? He asked. No one else was in earshot. Despite the swirl of anxiety that always bubbled inside her, she found herself nodding. Better to go with him voluntarily than to risk drawing attention by refusing. Besides, she couldn't deny her curiosity about what he wanted to discuss. They left the main house through a side exit and followed a narrow path that wound past the orchards and storage sheds. The afternoon sun cast long shadows, and a pleasant breeze stirred the grass. Sylvia stayed a step behind Rowan, heart fluttering. At length, they came upon a secluded patch of wildflowers that bordered the orchard fence. Rowan turned to face her, shifting his weight awkwardly. "I wanted to talk away from prying eyes," he said, voice subdued. She folded her arms, wary. "What's on your mind?" He considered her, eyes flicking to the faint bruise still visible on her wrist before meeting her gaze. "I've been thinking about the role of omegas in this pack. Before I left for war, I never gave it much thought, but now seeing the mistreatment, the fear, the isolation, it's wrong. It always was, but I was too blind to notice." Sylvia's throat tightened. Hearing him speak so candidly felt surreal. "What do you plan to do?" she asked, her heart picking up speed. "I'm working with the elders to revise some of the old customs. The war cost us many lives, including those of skilled wolves we can't easily replace. We need unity, not division. I want to ensure omegas have better protection, fairer duties, perhaps even training to develop their strengths." His gaze held a flicker of determination. "And yes, I know there will be resistance from certain factions. I've already fielded complaints from a handful of betas who think I'm undermining tradition." She studied the ground, the grass tickling her ankles. Part of her yearned to believe in his intentions, to see a future where she and others like her were not just afterthoughts. But her caution remained. "Change can't happen overnight," she said quietly. "And it won't erase what happened in the past. You'll face real opposition from those who think omegas belong at the bottom." Rowan's jaw tensed. "They can think what they like. I won't allow cruelty under my watch. If that means I need to punish even more betas, I will." His voice resonated with a fierce resolve that sent a tremor through her chest. Then he took a measured breath, softening his tone. "But I won't pretend you owe me anything. I know that just because we share a mate bond doesn't mean you've forgotten how this pack treated you." Sylvia searched his face, seeing the sincerity there. "Thank you for understanding," she said softly. "And for trying." Standing so close, she felt the bond hum, like a chord thrumming between them. She wondered if he felt it too. He had to, given the slight tremor in his posture whenever their eyes locked. A hawk circled overhead, letting out a sharp cry that broke the tension. Rowan glanced at the sky. "I have more to do before I can announce any official changes. But I wanted you to know you're not alone. Whatever secrets you hold, whatever fears you carry, you don't have to shoulder them by yourself." Emotion welled up in her, and her hand curled into the fabric of her dress. She wrestled with the urge to confide in him, perhaps not the full truth, but a fragment of it, enough to relieve her internal burden. Yet she hesitated, imagining the terror she'd endured as a child, the uncontrollable power that had nearly destroyed a home. If Rowan knew the extent of it, would he still be so calm and reassuring? The risk felt monumental. In the end, she managed a nod. "I'll try to remember that," she whispered. Then, needing a break from the intensity of his gaze, she turned and gestured toward the orchard. "I should pick some fruit for the kitchens. They'll be needing apples soon." It was a polite way to excuse herself, to put a bit of distance before her composure fractured. Rowan didn't press her further. "All right, I'll walk you back." A faint trace of disappointment flickered across his face, but he masked it quickly. As they returned, Sylvia felt an unfamiliar ache in her chest, a longing for a trust she wasn't sure she could give, and for a resolution that felt just out of reach. Late that evening, after the sun dipped below the horizon, Sylvia found herself in the bustling washroom, scrubbing linens in a wide wooden tub. The water sloshed around her hands, its coolness a relief to her overheated palms. Though the chore was tedious, it gave her a moment of solitude. Most of the other Omegas had finished their tasks early to catch what little rest they could. She relished the quiet. A sudden hush fell beyond the washroom door. Sylvia paused, her senses prickling. When the door swung open, Jackson stepped inside. A jolt of alarm speared through her. She gripped the edge of the tub, recalling all too well the violence of his last outburst. Despite Rowan's orders, Jackson wore a cold sneer, as though challenging the new restrictions. He took a slow step forward, boots echoing ominously on the wooden floor. "I heard a rumor," he drawled. "The great Alpha is so taken with you that he wants to shield you from every little danger. Must be nice to have such special treatment." Malice curled his lip. Sylvia's heart pounded. She considered calling for help, but the knowledge that Rowan might come running, revealing how closely he watched over her, made her hesitate. That would only enrage Jackson further. She swallowed hard. "I'm just doing my chores. Leave me alone." He ignored her plea, stepping closer until his shadow fell over the tub. "You think you're safe because of that bond?" he said, voice taut with anger. "What do you have that's worth the Alpha's attention? Some hidden trick? Or are you just playing innocent until he claims you?" Sylvia's breath caught. Did he suspect her secret? Anxiety flared, but she steadied her voice. "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied. "The bond is what it is. I never asked for it." He leaned in, breath hot against her cheek. "You'll bring ruin, mark my words. Omegas can't handle power. One day you'll slip up, and all this special treatment will vanish." His eyes gleamed with unsettling intensity. "When that day comes, I'll be there to see you fall." Fury and fear twisted in Sylvia's gut. She'd endured years of belittlement, but now she had more to protect. Somehow, her bond with Rowan and the pack's fragile hope emboldened her. "I won't let you bully me anymore," she forced out, voice shaking with pent-up rage. "And if you cross the Alpha's decrees again, you'll pay for it." Jackson barked a laugh, though an edge of uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Brave words for a little Omega. He stepped back, perhaps sensing that any direct assault on her now might be too risky. "We'll see how long you remain at the top. Fate can be cruel." His words hung in the air as he sauntered out, leaving her trembling. She sank against the tub, heart pounding. She hated how her entire body shook with both anger and helplessness. Part of her longed to confide in Rowan, to let him protect her from Jackson's venom. But something stopped her, a stubborn need to assert her own strength. If she clung to Rowan for every threat, how would she ever stand on her own 2 feet? Yet, as the night deepened and the flickering lanterns cast shadows against the walls, she couldn't deny the persistent terror in her bones. If Jackson kept pushing, if he discovered even a hint of her hidden ability, he might unleash a storm of accusations that would tear the pack apart. She needed to be cautious, for her sake and Rowan's. That caution wavered the following afternoon, when the neighboring visitors returned. Word spread swiftly that the same traveling wolves had arrived at the gate, asking to speak with Rowan. Sylvia heard about it from another Omega, while carrying fresh water to the main house. Her stomach dropped. She recalled the visitors' pointed questions about specialized Omegas. Heart hammering, she finished her errand and tried to slip away before anyone summoned her. But a sharp order stopped her in her tracks. "Sylvia, one of the elders called, an older woman with gray hair braided down her back. "We need more pictures in the council room. Quickly." Sylvia bit her lip. To refuse would raise suspicion. She turned on her heel, arms tense with dread. Moments later, she found herself in the corridor leading to the council chamber, carefully balancing a tray of pitchers and cups. The doors stood slightly ajar, voices drifting into the hallway, polite but tinged with tension. She approached quietly, not wanting to interrupt, though her senses absorbed every syllable. "Still curious about your pack's strengths," one of the visitors was saying. "The truce between our territories relies on mutual confidence. If you hold any unique assets, it might benefit us both to be forthcoming." Rowan's voice replied with cool diplomacy. "We've already outlined our resources. We have farmland, a reliable water supply, and a trained guard. What more do you need to know?" A scoff, perhaps from another visitor. "We heard rumors of an Omega with unusual powers. It's rare, but not impossible. Some call them gifted Omegas, wolves with abilities beyond normal shape-shifting. Our pack has encountered such individuals before. If you have one here, it could change our approach to alliance." Sylvia's blood froze. She remembered the chaos she had once caused, how the memory of that night still haunted her. Could these visitors be searching specifically for her? Rowan's tone hardened. "We do not exploit our Omegas, gifted or otherwise. If you came here expecting to trade or harness some mythical power, you'll be disappointed." Murmurs of dissatisfaction rippled among the visitors. One of them pressed, "Yet the rumors persist, particularly now, with your new mate rumored to be an Omega." Sylvia took that as her cue to slip inside, if only to keep the visitors from speaking further about her in her absence. Summoning her courage, she nudged the door open and carried in the tray, head bowed. The council chamber's large wooden table stretched in the center, ringed by elders and visitors. Rowan stood at one end, tense and formidable. His eyes flicked to Sylvia instantly, a protective gleam in their depths. "Excuse the interruption," she murmured, placing the pitchers and cups within easy reach. Her heart thumped so violently she thought the entire room might hear it. The visitors regarded her with open interest, noting her Omega uniform. The spokesman, the same regal woman from before, narrowed her gaze. "Is this your mate?" she asked Rowan, tone sliding between politeness and prying curiosity. A heavy beat of silence followed. Rowan inclined his head, shoulders stiff. "It is," he acknowledged, "and she is under my protection." The woman's eyes roamed Sylvia's figure, as though seeking signs of hidden power. Sylvia suppressed a shiver. The scrutiny felt like a blade hovering over her secrets. She forced herself to keep her composure, setting the tray down without spilling a drop. "May I fetch anything else?" she asked, hoping to excuse herself quickly. One of the visitors leaned forward. "What is your name?" A cold sweat beaded on Sylvia's neck. She glanced at Rowan, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod that told her it was all right to speak. "Sylvia," she answered quietly. "And you've been an Omega here for how long?" The visitor continued, voice smooth. "A little over 2 years," Sylvia replied, keeping her eyes lowered. Her thoughts churned with panic at their focus on her, but she tried to remain calm. "Have you always been in this territory? Or did you come from elsewhere?" The woman's tone carried a razor's edge of interest, hinting that she suspected a hidden origin. Rowan interjected, voice firm. "Her past is not your concern. She is part of my pack now, and any personal details are private." His words were polite, but the underlying growl was undeniable. The visitors exchanged knowing looks. The spokesman smiled thinly. We see. We only ask because our alpha is quite thorough when assessing potential allies. We wish to ensure no dangerous secrets linger in the background. If you trust this omega enough to make her your mate, perhaps there's nothing more to discuss. Something about the way they spoke, the subtle glances exchanged, made Sylvia's heart pound harder. She quickly realized these visitors didn't simply want an alliance for trade. They were scoping out possible threats, seeking leverage. If they discovered her true abilities, they might attempt to blackmail Rowan or force him into a pact. Rowan's gaze swept the room, spine rigid. Precisely. There is nothing more to discuss regarding her. Let us return to matters of actual trade and border agreements. Sylvia, you may leave. He kept his tone even, though the tension in his stance betrayed his protective fury. Grateful for the dismissal, she bobbed her head and retreated, the visitor's eyes following her until the door closed behind her. Only once she was back in the corridor, her heart hammering against her ribs, did she dare exhale. The sense of danger clung to her skin like a film of ice. She sensed that those visitors wouldn't let the matter rest. They would keep prying, searching for any advantage they could. For the rest of the day, she remained vigilant, avoiding any further encounters with the outsiders. But her worry grew, amplified by the knowledge that if they pressed too hard and uncovered her secret, Rowan's leadership might be imperiled. Perhaps that was their aim, to find a weakness in the new Alpha's rule, using the rumor of a gifted Omega as the perfect tool. That night, Sylvia couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned on her cot, mind swirling with guilt and fear. Eventually she rose and wrapped herself in a thin shawl, deciding to seek solace outside. The moon hung bright overhead as she slipped from the servants' quarters into the courtyard. Stars glimmered in a vast tapestry, and the chill night air brushed her cheeks. She found her feet guiding her to the same porch where she had once stood during that storm. Fittingly, Rowan stood there too, as if drawn by the same restless turmoil. He turned at her approach, surprise flitting across his features, followed by quiet relief. "Can't sleep?" he asked, voice low. She shook her head, stepping beneath the shelter of the porch's overhang. "Too many thoughts," she admitted. "About the visitors, about us, everything." Rowan gently placed a hand on the porch railing. "I know," he said, voice tinged with weariness. "They're pushing for information we can't give. I don't want them anywhere near you, but I have to handle this diplomatically. I can't risk an open conflict, not when the pack is still healing from the war." Sylvia leaned against a wooden beam, her pulse unsteady. She gazed out at the moonlit courtyard, shoulders tense. "I feel like I'm bringing trouble for you," she said, a raw edge to her tone. "If I hadn't come here, if the bond hadn't formed, maybe they wouldn't be so fixated on a gifted Omega." He drew closer, though he kept a respectful distance. "You're not the one causing trouble," he said gently. "They're prying because they see an opportunity, an angle to exploit. And even if you didn't have any secret, they'd still be poking around, hoping to find some advantage over our pack." He paused, eyes softening with concern. "But I won't let them harm you. They have no right to your past or your private truths." Her breath caught, and she felt tears threatening. The sincerity in his words reached into the hollow in her chest where fear had made its nest. "Rowan," she whispered, his name escaping her lips for the first time in a long while without the customary title. "You keep saying you want to protect me, but you hardly know me." "I know enough," he interjected, voice rough with feeling. "I know you've endured more than you should have. I know you have a soft heart beneath that wary shell. I can see how you care about the other Omegas, even when you try to hide it. And I know my wolf recognized you from the moment we crossed paths in that hall, even before the bond made it undeniable. I might not know every detail of your life, but I know who you are? Warmth pooled in Sylvia's chest, colliding with a surge of guilt. She wanted so badly to believe him, to sink into the comfort he offered. Still, she couldn't ignore the dread that one day he would discover her power and view her as a threat, not a mate. She swallowed hard. "There's so much you don't know," she said, voice trembling. "Things that could change how you see me." His gaze flicked over her face, seeming to catch the fear radiating from her eyes. He reached out, tentative, giving her every chance to pull away, and brushed a knuckle over her cheek. That single touch sent a quiver through her, a mix of relief and burning vulnerability. "When you're ready," he said, "tell me. If it makes me question everything, so be it, but at least let me be there, by your side." Her throat felt painfully tight. She leaned into his touch for a fleeting second, letting the comforting warmth of his hand seep into her weary bones. Then she recalled the sense of chaos she had unleashed in her past, the memory of scorching energy that had nearly consumed her. She eased back, shoulders curving inward. "I'm afraid," she admitted, tears burning at her lashes. "Not just of them, or the betas, but of myself." Rowan's face reflected heartbreak he tried to hide. "I wish I could take that fear away," he murmured. "You don't have to face it alone. Not anymore." She pressed her lips together, nodding in silent gratitude. In that moment, she realized the bond had grown stronger through every shared gaze and fleeting touch. Despite the secrecy she clung to, an undeniable link pulsed between them, forging a deeper connection than she'd ever experienced. The night air grew colder, nudging them both to return indoors. But as Sylvia parted ways with Rowan, her soul felt lighter than it had in a long time. Perhaps the visitor's meddling would force her hand eventually, but for now, she clung to the fragile hope that Rowan's acceptance might survive whatever storm was looming on the horizon. A few days later, dawn arrived with an air of restless expectation. The visitors still lingered in the area, claiming they needed time to finalize the details of a formal alliance. Whispers ran wild that they were probing for weaknesses. Rowan made a point of keeping them under polite surveillance, ensuring they couldn't wander freely. Tensions heightened among the betas, many of whom resented the outsider's presence almost as much as they resented Rowan's new policies. Sylvia tried her best to remain inconspicuous, though she couldn't help noticing the watchful eyes following her whenever she ventured into the halls or courtyard. At times, it felt as if the entire pack held its breath, waiting for the next spark that would ignite a confrontation. She dreaded what might happen if her secret flared into view. Every passing hour felt like treading on thin ice. That afternoon, she was sent to restock blankets and linens in the upper rooms of the main house, an errand that offered a brief respite from the bustle downstairs. She climbed the wooden staircase to the top floor, arms piled with folded blankets. Up here, the air felt still, dust motes swirling in golden sunbeams from the narrow windows. The second-floor corridors were lined with storerooms and a few guest chambers that stood unused. As she entered one of the storerooms, setting down her burdens, she heard a muffled noise from the adjoining corridor, a door opening, followed by hushed voices. Curiosity piqued, she edged to the threshold and peered around. Two of the visitors had slipped into a side room, apparently unaware she was nearby. She recognized the spokesman, the regal woman who had questioned Rowan in the council chamber. The other was a younger man, bearing a faint scar along his jaw. "What is the delay?" the younger man asked, agitation flickering in his voice. We've tested Rowan's resolve, probed every corner of this pack, yet we still don't have proof. Patience, the woman replied, her tone clipped. The rumor of a gifted Omega is too persistent to be mere gossip. We just need the right provocation, the perfect push to reveal any hidden abilities. Sylvia's stomach dropped. So her fears were correct. They were deliberately seeking to expose her. Blood roared in her ears. She glanced around, looking for a way to slip away unnoticed, but the corridor was narrow. If she took a single step, they might hear her. It's risky, the man grumbled. Rowan is not one to cross. His warrior reputation is well earned, and the pack is rallying around his leadership. If we're caught, we could face serious repercussions. The woman let out a soft, cold laugh. No risk, no reward. If a hidden Omega truly wields unusual power, any alliance is secondary to seizing that power for ourselves. Imagine harnessing that gift for our Alpha's benefit. No other pack could stand against us. Sylvia's hands clenched. The clarity of their ambitions struck her like a punch in the gut. They didn't care about forging peace or fair trade. They wanted to capture, perhaps even control, whichever unfortunate Omega manifested special abilities. That meant her. She fought back a wave of nausea. It was only a matter of time before they provoked a situation so dire that she'd be forced to use her power, thus exposing herself. Just then, the younger man moved toward the doorway. Sylvia scrambled back, heart pounding. She pressed herself against the storeroom wall, breath held, praying they wouldn't notice her eavesdropping. Their footsteps receded down the corridor, and she eased out a trembling exhale. She had to warn Rowan. They were plotting something dangerous. Abandoning the blankets, she hastened downstairs, taking the steps 2 at a time. She nearly collided with a beta at the base of the staircase, muttering a quick apology before continuing toward Rowan's study. Anxiety laced her every movement. If the visitors set their plan in motion, everything could unravel in an instant. Reaching the study, she found the door partially open. Rowan was seated at his desk, frowning at a map spread out before him. He glanced up as she entered, concern replacing his earlier concentration. "Sylvia, you look pale." She shut the door behind her, breathing hard. "I overheard them," she managed, voice quavering. 2 of the visitors. They were talking about forcing the rumored gifted Omega to reveal herself. Rowan's expression darkened. He stood, fists clenched at his sides. "So, my suspicions were right," he said, voice thick with anger. "They're not here for diplomacy. They want to exploit us." Sylvia's pulse thundered in her ears. She felt a near irresistible urge to confess that they were correct, that she was indeed the one they sought. Yet a clench of fear locked her jaw. "They might try something drastic," she warned. "Provoke an incident, maybe even threaten the pack, so that she hesitated, catching herself. "If the gifted Omega is truly here, she'd have to defend others." Rowan's gaze flicked over her face, an unreadable emotion glinting in his eyes. She braced for him to demand the truth, to pry out her hidden power with words. But instead, he exhaled slowly, nodding. "I'll increase security," he said. "Have the betas watch their movements carefully. If they so much as raise a blade against one of ours, they'll face immediate retaliation." He stepped around the desk, closer to her. "But if there's a kernel of truth to this rumor, if you happen to know anything about it," he added gently, "you need to be safe above all. They're looking for leverage. Don't let them manipulate you." She stood rigid, fear mingling with a flash of gratitude that he wasn't pushing harder. I'll stay close, she said, biting her lip. But if they stage an attack or something else, people might be hurt. Her voice wavered. She had no desire to expose her power, but neither could she watch innocents suffer. Rowan touched her shoulder, a reassuring warmth passing through the fabric of her dress. We'll handle it, one step at a time. Just promise me you won't run if trouble arises. We're stronger together, even if you still need space. Tears threatened as she glanced away, nodding. She was tired of running, tired of being the powerless Omega who lurked in the shadows. Yet she wasn't sure she was ready to stand by Rowan's side openly, not with the terrifying possibility that she might unleash forces she couldn't control. I promise, she managed quietly. He gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze, then let her go, turning to gather a few documents. I'll meet with the elders now, he said. Stay near the main house. I'll send word if anything happens. Sylvia slipped out, heart rattling against her ribcage. She tried to push away the ominous sense that time was running short, that the visitors would force her hand in a violent showdown. If that happened, the entire pack would discover her secret, and she might lose Rowan in the fallout. 2 days later, the trap was sprung. It happened at dusk, when most of the pack was finishing chores or preparing for supper. Sylvia was in the courtyard carrying a bundle of kindling for the kitchen fires when a commotion erupted near the front gate. Shouts rang out, followed by the clang of weapons. A spasm of alarm coursed through her as she dropped the bundle, running toward the noise. She emerged to find a chaotic scene. Several visitors, including the regal woman, had drawn swords and were squaring off against a cluster of betas who scrambled to mount a defense. Rowan strode into the fray, eyes blazing with alpha authority, demanding an explanation. What is the meaning of this? He roared, halting the chaos momentarily. The woman sneered, stepping forward. We've learned that you've been hiding something. Or rather, someone, she said, her voice carrying. A gifted Omega with abilities that could tip the balance of power. We will have her surrendered to us, or there will be blood. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Jackson, standing among the betas, cast a sidelong glance at Sylvia, suspicion etched on his features. Rowan's jaw tensed, fists tight. There is no such Omega in this pack, he growled, though his gaze flickered toward Sylvia in concern. Lies, spat the woman. She gestured to her comrades. I suggest you stand aside unless you want innocent wolves to suffer. We'll tear this place apart if we must. Something will force your hidden treasure into the open. The betas shifted nervously, some ready to fight, others eyeing Rowan for direction. Tension skyrocketed. Sylvia hovered at the courtyard's edge, horror swelling in her chest as she realized the visitors intended to instigate violence on a grand scale. She saw them fanning out, brandishing weapons. Several older Omegas cowered behind a stone pillar, trembling in fear. Rowan held his ground, voice colder than ice. If you raise a blade against my pack, I promise you'll regret it. His wolf aura radiated such pressure that a few of the visitors faltered, but the woman's twisted smile indicated she was undeterred. Without warning, one of her allies lunged forward and slashed at a young Omega who had the misfortune of standing too close. The blade caught the Omega's arm, drawing a cry of pain and a spatter of blood. Instantly, chaos erupted. The betas surged in, weapons clashing with the intruders. Rowan let out a furious growl, launching himself at the nearest attacker. His fists met steel, the ring of metal on bone echoing. Sylvia froze, heart lurching at the sight of the wounded Omega crumpled on the ground. Her entire body trembled. Memories crashed in, reminding her of the night years ago when she lost control. She recalled how her fear and anger had triggered a surge of energy that seared through walls, toppled furniture, nearly burned her caretaker's home to embers. She had been cast out, labeled a monster. But here, wolves were in real danger. The visitors had orchestrated a scenario to draw out her power, and they were succeeding. More intruders pressed into the courtyard, systematically targeting vulnerable pack members to coax her out. Desperation constricted her chest. She couldn't stand by and watch innocent people suffer just to keep her secret. Swallowing hard, she rushed forward. The wounded Omega lay whimpering in a small pool of blood, eyes wide with terror. Sylvia dropped to her knees beside them, pressing her trembling hands over the wound. She had never been a skilled healer, but she couldn't let them bleed out. "Sylvia, get away!" a beta shouted, slashing at an intruder. "It's not safe." Ignoring the chaos around her, she locked eyes with the terrified Omega. Adrenaline surged, and something in her mind twisted open, a channel she had kept sealed for so long. She felt the faint hum of energy stirring beneath her skin. It was different from raw destruction this time, more focused, more attuned to life. She let it build, ignoring the part of her screaming that she was about to reveal herself. If she could do something, anything, to save this packmate, she pressed her palms firmly on the bleeding wound, focusing on the swirl of energy in her core. A tingle coursed down her arms, and the wet blood under her fingers glowed faintly. The Omega's eyes widened, confusion and awe flickering across their features. Sylvia held her breath, willing the power to mend rather than destroy. At first the energy wobbled, threatening to spin out of control. Fear lanced her thoughts. What if she unleashed the destructive force again? She forced herself to remain calm, to channel her will into healing instead of devastation. Gradually, the Omega's ragged breathing steadied, and the flow of blood slowed. A luminous sheen enveloped Sylvia's hands, and when she pulled them away, the wound was no longer gushing. Though still raw, it had partially sealed, enough to spare the Omega's life. A hush descended on the courtyard, as if the battle paused just long enough for wolves to witness this miracle. Jaws hung open. The intruders stared in shock. Rowan, locked in a fierce grapple with one of the visitors, twisted around to see Sylvia crouched over the wounded packmate, her hands still glowing with residual energy. Astonishment broke across his face. He'd likely suspected she hid something, but perhaps not this. Sylvia's breath came in shaky gasps. She felt a wave of dizziness. Using her power left her drained. Before she could compose herself, the regal woman's shrill laugh rang out. "So there she is," she crowed, pointing a blade at Sylvia. "The gifted Omega. You see, we knew it." Rowan's eyes locked on Sylvia, a storm of emotions battling in his gaze. Worry, shock, a flicker of hurt that she hadn't told him. But protective fury quickly overshadowed everything. He hurled his opponent aside and sprinted toward her, placing himself between Sylvia and the woman. "You won't touch her," he snarled, voice vibrating with alpha command. "She belongs to my pack." The woman bared her teeth. "We only want to harness that power." "Step aside, Rowan. This doesn't have to end in more bloodshed. Hand her over, and we'll leave." Sylvia staggered upright, her heart hammering. She watched Rowan's broad shoulders, each muscle tense, ready to fight. Part of her demanded she run, but the sight of him standing guard fueled a surge of emotion. He truly meant to shield her, despite the revelation of her abilities. Even now, he didn't waver in his defense. "You have no claim," he hissed at the woman. "Her gifts, if she chooses to use them, will serve this pack, not outsiders. You've attacked us, spilled innocent blood. You've lost any chance of diplomacy." The courtyard erupted again as the intruders lunged, furious at their failed intimidation. Rowan whirled, grappling with two attackers at once. Betas closed ranks, trying to protect the wounded. A sword flashed toward Sylvia's shoulder, but she ducked, the adrenaline spiking. She was no warrior, yet her wolf instincts flared, urging her to survive. She scrambled away from the sharp steel. Though fear threatened to paralyze her, she remembered the trembling power in her veins. One of the intruders cornered her by a toppled bench. Eyes glinting with malicious intent, he raised his sword. "Surrender," he sneered. Sylvia's heart raced. She pressed a hand to the ground, channeling the energy again. This time, it sparked outward in a visible wave, ripping through the dirt and unsettling the intruder's balance. He stumbled back with a yelp as cracks fissured the ground beneath him. A swirl of dust obscured his view, giving Sylvia a chance to scramble behind a broken crate. She gasped for air, the raw power thrumming in her bloodstream both intoxicating and terrifying. She had never dreamed it could be harnessed in a controlled way. For so long, she had believed it existed only as a destructive force. But now, in the chaos of battle, she was discovering some measure of command. She had to use it carefully, though, or risk harming innocents. Through the dust and shouting, she saw the regal woman closing in on Rowan, who was briefly distracted by another attacker. With a feral grin, the woman aimed her sword at Rowan's unguarded side. Panic punched through Sylvia's chest. If the woman's strike landed, Rowan could be grievously wounded. Without hesitating, Sylvia sprinted forward. Her pulse thundered in her ears, the bond pulsing with protective urgency. "Rowan!" she shouted, and he spun just in time to see the blade slicing toward him. He couldn't dodge in time. He'd been pinned by another adversary's hold. Desperation took hold of Sylvia. She thrust out her hand, summoning the energy. White-hot sparks arced from her fingertips, crackling with raw intensity. The intruder restraining Rowan cried out as the sparks danced across his arms, forcing him to let go. The regal woman's sword stroke wavered as she turned her attention to this sudden display. Rowan seized the moment. He wrenched free and lunged, disarming the woman with a swift, brutal twist of her wrist. Her sword clattered to the ground, and she stumbled, eyes wide with shock. The other intruder, still reeling from the sparks, retreated. The courtyard fell silent except for the ragged breathing of the combatants. A few pockets of fighting continued, but most of the visitors realized they were overmatched. Betas had them surrounded, weapons drawn. Sylvia's vision blurred from exertion, her knees buckling. Rowan stepped forward and caught her in his arms before she hit the ground. His heart hammered against her cheek. She sagged into him, drained, trying to catch her breath. For a moment, everything seemed unreal. The hush after the battle, the swirl of dust, the wounded wolves clutching their injuries. She was dimly aware of the regal woman being bound by a furious beta. Rowan's voice cut through her haze. "Sylvia," he whispered urgently, guiding her to lean against a nearby wall. "Stay with me. Are you hurt?" She shook her head, tears burning. "I'm okay. Just exhausted." Her limbs trembled, each muscle flooded with the aftershocks of power. He cupped her cheek, eyes blazing with a mix of concern and awe. "You saved my life," he said quietly. "You saved us all." His voice caught, and she realized the significance of her actions. She had revealed her power, yes, but in doing so, she had protected the pack. The swirling fear of rejection lingered, but Rowan's gaze brimmed with gratitude and something deeper. Around them, betas tied up the remaining intruders, forcing them to kneel. Jackson, bruised but upright, stared at Sylvia with mingled shock and wariness, as if uncertain whether to fear or revere her. The older Omegas, trembling in the shadows, looked on as well, eyes wide. Slowly, a wave of hushed realization passed through the gathered wolves. Their new alpha's mate was not just an Omega, she possessed remarkable power. An elder stepped forward, voice unsteady. "Alpha, what are your orders?" Rowan's voice hardened. "We'll keep these intruders imprisoned until we decide how to handle them. They've spilled blood on our lands and threatened the safety of my mate and my pack." He raised his eyes to sweep across the courtyard. "As for the rest of you, tend to the wounded and secure the gates. Make sure there are no more of them lurking outside." Wolves sprang into action, following his directives. Rowan gently helped Sylvia to her feet. She leaned on him, trying to steady the trembling in her legs. His arm encircled her waist, and she felt the comforting warmth of his body. Despite the shock of revealing her powers, a sense of relief unfurled within her. She had broken her vow of secrecy, but perhaps for the right reason. "Let's get you inside," Rowan murmured. His voice held no condemnation, only concern. "You need rest." He guided her back into the main house, away from the carnage. She caught sight of wide-eyed pack members in the corridors, some whispering about the battle, others pointing at her with awe or unease. It was all too overwhelming. She let Rowan lead her to a small, private chamber used for quieter meetings. He shut the door behind them and carefully eased her into a chair. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Rowan knelt in front of her, resting his hands on her knees. "Are you in pain?" he asked, searching her eyes. She shook her head, though tears of exhaustion threatened. "I'm just drained. My body feels like it's on fire, but not physically hurt." His gaze flickered with a complex swirl of emotions. "Thank you," he said, voice hushed. "Thank you for saving me, for saving our pack. You were incredible out there." He exhaled, attempting a small smile. "Though I suspect you never wanted to show anyone what you could do." A tremulous laugh escaped her, laced with relief and sorrow. "I was terrified," she admitted, "but I couldn't let them hurt you." Her eyes burned with unshed tears. "I'm sorry I kept it from you." He squeezed her hands gently. "I wish you had felt safe enough to tell me, but I understand why you hid it. This power, it must have caused you grief before." He stroked a thumb over her knuckles. "I saw how carefully you wielded it, how you helped that wounded Omega. You're not a monster, Sylvia. You never were." She broke then, tears slipping free. All the old fears of rejection, of being labeled a weapon or an abomination, came pouring out. "In my last pack I lost control," she whispered. "I almost burned a house down. They banished me, said I was dangerous. I believed them." Rowan's expression softened with compassion. "You were probably just a frightened child who didn't understand her power," he said quietly. "That doesn't make you dangerous. It makes you someone who needed guidance and acceptance." He gently brushed the tears from her cheeks. "Let me give you that now." She closed her eyes, leaning into the warmth of his palm. The thick walls she had built around her heart cracked further, allowing glimmers of hope to seep in. After a moment, she opened her eyes. "Do you think the pack will accept me?" she asked, voice trembling with the vulnerability she usually hid. He lifted her hands to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles, a gesture that sent her heart fluttering. "They will follow my lead," he vowed. "I intend to make sure no one ever mistreats you again, and if your power can help others, so be it." We'll find a way for you to master it without fear." A fresh surge of emotion coursed through her, a mixture of gratitude, relief, and a flicker of joy she couldn't quite name. She had spent so long surviving in the shadows, convinced no one would ever stand by her side if they saw the truth. But now, looking at Rowan's unwavering devotion, she sensed a new possibility unfolding, a life where she wasn't defined by her rank or her power, but by the choices she made and the mate who supported her. He stood, drawing her to her feet with him. She wobbled but found her balance as he wrapped an arm around her shoulders, guiding her out of the room. "Let's reassure the pack," he said. "They need to see us together, to know that our bond is real, and that you're not something to fear." Outside, the courtyard was still a flurry of activity, with betas rounding up the last of the intruders. Some were escorted to the dungeons beneath the main house, others carried away under heavy guard. The wounded had been whisked to the infirmary. A hush fell when Rowan and Sylvia emerged. Wolves paused to watch them pass, uncertain how to react. A few eyes lingered on Sylvia's trembling legs, or the dried blood on her hands from the healing she'd performed. Rowan's voice rang out, clear and resonant. "My mate has shown remarkable courage. The power she holds saved lives today." He paused, scanning the crowd, daring anyone to contradict him. "We will offer her the same respect we grant any protector of this pack. Let none of you forget how she risked herself to defend us from those who threatened our territory." Slowly, some heads dipped in reluctant acknowledgement. Others, especially the Omegas who had suffered all their lives, gazed at her with shining eyes of admiration. Sylvia felt her cheeks burn at the sudden attention, but she clung to Rowan's presence like a lifeline. He radiated assurance that she was safe, that he would stand between her and any who might accuse her of being a menace. One older beta, whom Sylvia recognized as having never particularly tormented the Omegas, stepped forward and bowed respectfully to Rowan, then turned to Sylvia. "You saved me out there," he said, voice trembling. "That spark of energy sent my attacker reeling. You have my gratitude." Sylvia nodded, tears pricking her eyes. "I'm glad you're all right," she managed. Murmurs of approval rose from a few onlookers, though uncertainty still lurked in others. Jackson stood at a distance, arms crossed. His expression flickered with residual anger, but a measure of wariness tempered it. He said nothing, clearly unwilling to challenge Rowan outright. At Rowan's instruction, the betas formed a perimeter to reinforce the gates and ensure no intruder remained at large. Then, after a final sweep, the courtyard grew quieter. The pack left to process the day's events. Rowan turned to Sylvia, voice laced with tenderness. "You must rest. Come with me. I'll see you're given a comfortable room." She started to protest, remembering the servants' quarters she was used to, but then realized how badly she ached for a decent bed and some respite from the swirling emotions. "All right," she whispered, leaning on him again as he led her indoors. Wolves parted for them, some with hesitant nods of respect, others with curious stares. Rowan brought her to a guest chamber near his own quarters, a space outfitted with a cozy bed, a small fireplace, and a wide window overlooking the orchard. "I'll have someone bring food," he said. "And fresh clothes." He paused, hesitating in the doorway. "Will you be all right here?" "I can stay if—" "I'll be all right," she assured him, though part of her longed for the comfort of his presence. "Just to thank you." Her voice hitched. He stepped closer, brushing a gentle kiss to her forehead. The simple contact drew a shiver of relief and longing through her body. "You're safe," he murmured. "That's all that matters." Then, With one last glance of concern, he slipped out, closing the door behind him. Sylvia released a trembling breath, gazing around the room in disbelief. Just a week ago, she had been the pack's invisible Omega, scurrying to avoid conflict, hiding her abilities behind a careful mask. Now, she was the Alpha's mate, acknowledged for her power, accepted, for the most part, by the pack she once feared. The bond with Rowan pulsed more strongly than ever, reassuring her that he wouldn't abandon her even after witnessing what she could do. That night, as she sank into the soft bed, she let the tears flow, tears of exhaustion, relief, and a dawning hope that her life might finally change for the better. She thought of Rowan's promise to stand by her, of the warmth in his gaze when he knelt to ensure she was unhurt. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to envision a future where love coexisted with acceptance, where her rank no longer condemned her to loneliness. And as she drifted into sleep, a single truth whispered through her weary mind. She had found her mate, and he had chosen her despite everything. Perhaps that was the most powerful magic of all. The next morning dawned with a delicate hush over the pack's territory. The tension had not wholly disappeared, but a new sense of solidarity took root. The captured intruders remained locked away, and Rowan convened the elders to determine their fate. Some advocated for swift punishment, even death, while others urged caution to avoid starting another war. Rowan listened calmly, though his stance was firm. They had attacked without provocation. There would be consequences. Sylvia, meanwhile, found herself unexpectedly free from menial chores. The cook, the elder guards, and the beta overseers all avoided giving her orders, unsure how to navigate her new status. She wasn't quite the Luna pack tradition required a formal ceremony for an Alpha's mate to claim that title. But she was no longer a lowly Omega either. The shift felt disorienting, like stepping into a foreign skin. Rowan sensed her discomfort. By midday, he took her aside, guiding her to a quiet garden behind the main house. Ivy draped the stone walls, and bright blossoms dotted the grass. Butterflies wove among the flowers, undisturbed by the pack's recent turmoil. "I can't stand seeing you feel awkward," Rowan said gently, taking her hand. The mate bond vibrated warmly at the contact. "I've spoken to the Council of Elders about expediting a recognition ceremony. It would officially mark you as my mate and grant you protection. No one would question your place again." Sylvia's heart thumped. "That's a big step," she whispered. Though she had yearned for acceptance, the idea of standing before the entire pack, pledging herself to Rowan publicly, was daunting. She recalled how the mate bond had flared that night in the hall, and how she'd run in terror. Things had changed, but the memory still prickled. He lifted her hand, pressing it gently to his chest. She felt the steady beat of his heart. "I won't force you," he assured, voice full of tenderness. "But if you want to stand by my side, if you feel ready, we can do this together. The pack needs to see that we're united, especially with the threat from outside territories." She gazed into his eyes, a swirl of emotions tightening her throat. In them, she saw acceptance, longing, and an unyielding promise to protect her. Slowly, she released a breath. Perhaps it was time to embrace what the bond had already woven between them. "I do want that," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "I'm afraid, but I'm tired of hiding. And I trust you." A radiant smile curved Rowan's lips, softening the strong planes of his face. "You have no idea how happy that makes me," he said. Then, leaning closer, He pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. The contact lingered, warmth blossoming through Sylvia's chest. She closed her eyes, letting the moment wash away her lingering doubts. 2 evenings later, the ceremony took place in the courtyard beneath a canopy of lantern light. Word had spread through the pack. Wolves gathered in hushed anticipation, forming a wide circle around the central clearing where a small altar had been arranged. The night air carried a faint chill, but the glow of lanterns and torchlight bathed everyone in a warm glow. Sylvia stood at Rowan's side, hands trembling slightly. She wore a simple, flowing dress that the elder women had insisted she wear for the occasion. Though it felt unusual against her skin, she appreciated their gesture of acceptance. Rowan, dressed in ceremonial garb that highlighted his position as Alpha, offered her a reassuring nod. His presence grounded her, easing some of the anxiety that threatened to bubble up. The elders performed a brief ritual, invoking blessings for unity and strength. Finally, they bowed to Rowan, signaling the moment when the new Alpha claimed his mate. Sylvia's heart pounded as she stepped forward with him, the circle of onlookers silent. Rowan's voice rang clear under the lanterns, though his eyes shone with emotion. "I stand here as Alpha to recognize what fate has already woven," he announced. "Sylvia is my mate, the one my wolf and my heart have chosen. Let all in this pack know that from this day forward, she stands by my side, deserving of respect and honor." Sylvia's breath caught. She placed her hand in his, swallowing past the tightness in her throat. She wanted to say something, to voice the swirl of feelings inside, gratitude, hope, lingering fear, but words failed her. Instead, she squeezed his hand, willing him to sense the depth of her resolve. The elders nodded solemnly, and one of them draped a narrow sash over Sylvia's shoulders, a gesture that symbolized her acceptance into the Alpha's household. A ripple of applause spread through the crowd, though it was softer and more reverent than raucous cheers. Sylvia spied a few betas exchanging guarded glances, but no one dared oppose the Alpha's official decree. She caught sight of Jackson, his features twisted in an unreadable expression. He made no move to disrupt the ceremony. Maybe he finally understood that his attempts to undermine her were futile. As the ceremony concluded, Rowan turned to her, eyes brimming with affection, and lifted her hand to his lips. The crowd parted to allow them space, and for a moment it felt as if they stood alone among the swaying torches. Sylvia exhaled shakily, her heart pounding in time with the bond that pulsed between them. "You're really mine now," Rowan whispered, just loud enough for her to hear. It wasn't possessive. Rather, it held a sense of awe. She smiled through tears she hadn't realized were falling. He bent, pressing a soft kiss to her lips, sealing the union the pack had just witnessed. The hush of the courtyard erupted into a gentle cheer, a wave of acceptance rising around them. Sylvia melted into him, arms winding around his neck. The years of suffering, the bruises, the fear, they still existed in her memory, that they no longer defined her. In that kiss, she felt a release of the old burdens, replaced by the warmth of a future shared. When they parted, Rowan gently rested his forehead against hers, eyes shining. A timid voice broke through the moment. "Alpha? Luna?" She turned, surprised by the title, Luna, something she'd never dreamed of being called, and found a young Omega standing there, looking bashful. "Congratulations," the Omega said. "And thank you for everything you did for us." Emotion tightened Sylvia's chest. She recalled her own insecurities and how often she'd felt invisible. Now, that same rank was addressing her with respect. She managed a soft smile. "You're welcome. We stand together now." Rowan laid a reassuring hand on the younger Omega's shoulder before returning his attention to Sylvia. Around them, the pack began to disperse, some returning to their routines, others lingering to talk or greet the new Luna. The night's lanterns seemed brighter than usual, as if they heralded a new era. In the days that followed, the pack gradually settled into a steady rhythm. The imprisoned intruders faced judgment for their attack, and Rowan reached out to neighboring allies to ensure that no further threats lurked beyond the borders. With the immediate danger handled, the pack's atmosphere lightened. Omegas ventured about their work with fewer sidelong glances of fear. Betas, though still adjusting to Rowan's reforms, found themselves cooperating more peacefully. Sylvia dedicated her time to healing the wounded, experimenting further with her ability under the guidance of the pack's more experienced herbal healers. She learned to channel her energy, not only for emergency mending, but also for soothing inflammation or speeding recovery from minor injuries. Each success bolstered her confidence. Once in a while, she felt the old fear lurking, that the power might slip beyond her control. But Rowan's unwavering support and the acceptance of the pack went a long way toward dispelling her nightmares. Late one afternoon, she joined Rowan atop the watchtower, overlooking the stretch of forest beyond their walls. A breeze stirred her hair, carrying the scent of pine and sun-warmed timber. Rowan slipped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. She leaned against him, enjoying the sense of peace that suffused the territory below. "You used to be the first one up here," he teased gently. "I remember hearing stories that you liked high places even when you were little, though back then, I never thought to investigate the rumor myself." She laughed softly, a contented sound that felt foreign and wonderful on her lips. "I guess I always wanted to see what lay beyond the confines of the pack. The horizon makes me feel free." He pressed his cheek to the top of her head, arms tightening around her in a comforting embrace. "We can roam wherever you like, once everything is stable. The war is over, the intruders are dealt with, and the pack is healing. We have time to dream now." A tender warmth spread through her. She recalled the terror she'd felt when he first returned from the battlefield, how she'd braced for a new era of cruelty. Instead, she had discovered a mate who valued her, not despite her differences, but because he recognized the strength beneath them. "I'd like that," she murmured, "to see more of the world with you by my side." They stood there in companionable silence for a while, watching the fading sunlight paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Distantly, the pack's daily noises drifted up: laughter, conversation, the occasional bark of a beta. It was a symphony of normalcy, and for once, Sylvia felt she belonged to it. No longer an outcast, no longer forced to hide. She had a place here, not only as the alpha's mate, but as a wolf who carried her own gifts and burdens with grace. Eventually, Rowan turned her gently, tilting her chin up so their gazes locked. The bond hummed in the silence between them. "We've come a long way," he said, voice husky with emotion. "When I think of everything you went through, everything the pack went through, and see you standing here with me, I'm grateful." Her eyes glistened. "Me too," she whispered, voice thick. "I never thought I'd find acceptance or even love in this territory, but you proved me wrong." He smiled, a warm, radiant expression she was coming to treasure. Then he leaned in for a kiss, gentle at first, but deepening into a promise of all the tomorrows they would share. She melted into him, savoring the taste of hope and possibility. With the setting sun as their witness, they sealed the path they had forged from fear to belonging. When they finally pulled apart, the sky had turned deep lavender, stars peeking through the veil of twilight. Rowan kept her hand firmly in his, guiding her down the watchtower steps. Below, the pack's lamps flickered in windows, a homely welcome. And Sylvia, once the weakest Omega nobody bothered to see, walked by her Alpha's side, no longer hidden by shadows or weighed down by secrets. Though challenges would surely come, for now, they had found their peace, together.